Good afternoon and welcome to Engaging with AI, Learning, Adapting, and Growing Together at CU Anschutz. I must say it's nice to see so many of us here, and I think a good number on the live stream on a very wintry and cold day here in Colorado. So again, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. I'd also like to thank our campus leadership for the idea behind this conference today. So the Chancellor, the deans, and I think many campus leaders a few months ago, it wasn't actually that long ago, had thought there was a real need and desire on campus to have a conference on campus looking at AI. And this was a conference which you see today, which is focused on those people who have almost no exposure to AI to those that are active in the field, looking at education, administration, research, and across our different missions. I must say, when we first started planning for this, we were going to do it in the Elliman Conference Center. I think you might have seen that first invitation. And we sent out the request, and we had 250 people like right off the bat, so that was too small. So we are now in the 600-seat auditorium. And I think at last check, we had 800 and some people who had registered. So we did add a live stream at the end, and I think that gives us an option. So for a lot of people to join that way. But I think what that told us that there was a lot of interest in this area and learning what people are doing on campus. So I think we've got a wonderful program lined up for you today. We'll have Bill Quinn join us in just a minute or two. He's going to really, I think, draw a picture of the current and future states of a lot of what we're talking about here, including AI. So very much looking forward to his talk. Next, after that, we're going to be talking about some of the tools that are available on campus currently, how they can be used in that regard. We'll have a discussion about some of the ethical considerations with AI from one of our very own here. We're then going to have a couple of research examples. So again, what are people doing in the research realm related to AI? As you can see, we're going to have a panel after that looking at education, and that'll be moderated, learning about some of the educational applications of AI. Just like to say a lot of people came together pretty quickly to put this together. I'd like to thank all of them. We'll say more about that later, but a great team behind this program today. I just say this before I turn things over to the chancellors for some additional comments. You know, I'm not an expert in AI. I would say in some ways I'm completely intrigued by AI, but I'm somewhat hesitant at times and not quite sure how I can use it in different aspects of my life. And I hope today that I'll get some examples of that, maybe some more confidence to go in the water. So I think there's a lot of us in that realm, and I hope we get that out of today's talk. So with that, I'll turn things over to the Chancellor for some additional comments.
I think it was about a year ago that I was meeting with a donor, and he said, "There's a book you ought to buy." And it was called The Coming Wave. I don't know how many of you have read it, but I went out and bought it and read it. And it kind of focused more on the perils of the potential perils of AI than the promise of it, although it did both. And frankly, it scared the hell out of me. I mean, you couldn't help but be alarmed by the potential negatives of it. I think what struck me as we began to wander down this road ourselves was our job really is to unlock the promise of AI, while at the same time minimizing the potential dangers of it. And I think that's what this afternoon is all about. I mean, we all know the promise, and both sides of that ledger have immense potential. And our job is to figure out how to maximize the promise and minimize the danger as it relates to our work in healthcare. I think it's a subject that is going to be all-consuming for many, many years to come. I suspect this is the first of many, many events like this that we'll have to try and bring the campus together to talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I'm excited about it. So I can't wait for the rest of the afternoon, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I intend to. Thanks very much.
Our first speaker today is Bill Quinn. So we just say a few things about Bill here. So Bill is a futurist and a foresight strategist with Tata Consultancy Services. With more than 25 years of leadership experience in both venture-backed startups and large enterprise businesses, including innovation, strategy development, product management, and marketing, he helps business leaders connect the dots to reimaging and navigating the future. Bill focuses on thought leadership and client advisory services in the areas of business strategy, foresight, innovation, and ecosystems. He advises clients on how to identify and understand the effects of convergence across multiple domains, its impact on emerging ecosystems and future scenarios, and the implications for business, organizations, and society. Please join me in welcoming Bill Quinn.
Thank you. Well, hey, everybody. I'm going to get my timer started here real quick so I don't run over. Thanks, everybody, so much for having me today. I'm really excited about being here, but more importantly, about the work that CU is doing around AI and really kind of leaning into this and trying to get ahead of this brave new world. So as was mentioned, I'm a futurist at TCS. And so I really spend my days kind of looking up towards the horizon at all of the things that are going on around us, not just in science and technology, but in geopolitics and economics, societal factors. And so that's what I really want to give everybody an opportunity to do in this presentation, is to sort of just lift your eyes up from the mundane day-to-day work that we all get mired in and really look at everything that's going on around us and understand how that fits in the context of artificial intelligence. In addition to spending my time sort of looking out towards the horizon, I also spend a lot of time kind of looking in the rearview mirror at history, because history can teach us a lot about where the future might be headed. And so we're going to break this presentation down into a couple of different parts. We're going to start with a little bit of a history lesson, and then we'll bring us to present day and then launch off into the future. So if I could leave you with just sort of one thought for today, it would be this quote by a futurist named Alvin Toffler, and that is that the illiterate of the 21st century won't be those who can't read and write, but those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn, and do that over and over again throughout their lives and throughout their careers. Now that sounds great, it's easy to say, but it's a lot harder to actually do. Let's have a look at what I mean.
All right, one more time.
Once you have a rigid way of thinking in your head, sometimes you cannot change that, even if you want to. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left.
So that professor has been trying to give away $100 for something like 8 years now for anybody that can ride that bike across the stage, and he's yet to have to part with that money. And so it's just a good illustration of how ingrained our mental processes get and how difficult those can be to break. The other thing that's important for us to remember is that learning from our own lived experiences over our own time frame really isn't adequate, because most of the most important lessons come beyond our own lifetime. And so that then begs the question, what does history tell us about the future? So we're going to break this down kind of in the context of the growth of knowledge. And that began, of course, with language, and then writing, and then really the democratization of that writing through the printing press, and then ultimately the steam engine that gave mobility to that written word and really massively expanded that growth of knowledge. And so that led to this period of time from about 1870 to 1920, where some of the really greatest inventions were created, things like the internal combustion engine, the telephone, and electricity. And these general purpose technologies, we have to remember that they don't just sort of land in our lap and all of a sudden everybody's using them, right? We have to understand that they sort of go on this pace where they start out with point solutions, then have broader applications, and then ultimately system level change, where you walk into a room and flip on the light and don't really think about all the magic that's happening in the background. And in the context of electricity, that took 40 years. And so again, it's important to remember that these things do take time as we move through up to that system level change. While there was a lot of great inventions, there were a lot of things going wrong during that time, sort of systemic undertones that were going on during this period of time, primarily from about 1914 to 1940. And as you look up at this list, I challenge you to look at anything on that list and identify something that we're not seeing in the headlines today. And so what we learned from this is that, even though we recognize that there are things that need to be fixed, we're a pretty stubborn species. And we don't, like to change our habits, and we tend to be very resistant to them unless we need to do so. And that leads us to catalysts, things like World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II, things that really force us forward and drive change necessarily. So now I want to focus on this period of time from about 1870 to 1970. A lot of people call it the special century. It was the second industrial revolution, and it was a period of time where our standard of living across all aspects of our lives was elevated in a way that had never happened before in human history. And so we have to ask ourselves why. What was it about that period of time that allowed that incredible elevation in our standard of living, particularly for those of us in the Western world, in such a relatively short amount of time? And the answer is that it wasn't any one thing. It was the convergence of a lot of forces going on all at the same time. And as I mentioned before, it wasn't just science and technology. It was certainly science and technology was an important part of it, but it was geopolitics, new governments being formed, new economic models and business models being formed that really created this special century. And so all of this is really a conversation about convergence. And convergence is simply this virtuous cycle where events in one domain spur action in another. And of course, it didn't stop there. About 1950, we started the digital revolution with computers. And then in the 1970s and 1980s, that sort of morphed into the personal computer. And then the internet gave sort of massive explosion to this idea of growth of knowledge, right? It allowed people from all over the world to have nearly instantaneous access to mountains of information. And then the smartphone really gave mobility to that and allowed us to have kind of the world's knowledge in our pocket and available to us at any time. And that leads us to today and starting to look forward. And now we find ourselves in the AI era. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the future of AI and where this might be headed. And I want to do this by starting out talking about just kind of how fast this is moving, right? From the first GPTs to artificial general intelligence, which is where, the path that we're kind of on and what that looks like. So, it took, 5 or so years for us to get from GPT-2, which was generally thought to be the level of about a preschooler, to GPT-4, which was about the level of a smart high school student. And then within just a few months, we came out with GPT-01, which is roughly the equivalent of a PhD student. I was actually on an email thread with a number of computer science professors here at CU, and they were putting 01 through its paces when it first came out, and that was their conclusion as well, that it's about the level of a PhD student. And then just a few months later, in December of last year, we arrive at GPT-03. There's a software sort of competition that you can go into if you're a software engineer, and it will sort of rank you and grade you. And GPT-03 is at the level of some of the most advanced software engineers in the world. And so, again, it's a good illustration of how fast we're moving. And it begs the question, how fast are we, how far away are we from, AGI and getting to the point where we're an automated AI researcher or engineer is kind of at our fingertips. This is a quote from a famous futurist named Ray Kurzweil. He's the head of research at Google. Has been incredibly prescient in terms of his predictions about various technologies and when they'll be released. And he wrote a book way back in 2006 and estimated that it would come out sometime around 2029. And everybody thought he was bonkers. They thought we were, decades and decades away from that. And even as recently as, 2019, 2020, it was thought that we were 50 years away from artificial general intelligence. And we're now having all of these sort of forecast errors that are accelerating that date. And now the consensus is that we'll be somewhere between 2026 and 2030. And the more that I hear sort of the most advanced, AI technologists and CEOs talking, it's looking like it's going to be closer to that 2026 timeframe. But regardless of where it falls in there, in the next 5 years, we could be at a level of artificial general intelligence. And if that happens, we have to ask ourselves, what does that mean, right? What does that mean in terms of our political focus? I think, when you see in the 2026 and certainly the 2028 election, that's going to be a big topic of discussion. How do we manage and deal with artificial intelligence? Big shifts in the job market, having artificial intelligence disrupting jobs, AIs working alongside you as agents, and new jobs and industries being formed. Geopolitical tensions, we're already seeing that between the US and China. There's sort of this AI arms race that's going on right now that's going to continue. And then societal transitions as well. How are we going to sort of think about AI and AGI and how it should be used from a societal perspective. And so the question is, how do we think about this in the future? How do we think about the use of artificial intelligence in the future? And how do we, understand what might happen? And the way that we really suggest doing this is by what we call rehearsing the future. And I say rehearsing the future very specifically as opposed to predicting the future, because predicting the future on this kind of technology is really challenging. Things are moving too fast. They're too complex to really be able to make any accurate predictions. And so we recommend this process of identifying multiple future scenarios that could play out and then sort of gaming each of those out and thinking about how you'll respond to each one of them and putting markers in place to tell you if you're heading in that direction or a different direction and sort of course correct as you go. And we recommend doing that by asking what-if questions. And I love this quote from Amy Webb, another futurist. She says, if we encourage what-if questions today, we can avoid asking what-now questions in the future. And so a good example of this is, will artificial intelligence be more profound than fire or electricity in the internet? What if the answer is yes? We do these polls periodically to ask questions like this. And we asked this question back in July of 2021, and the vast majority of people either said no or it's too early to tell. Then just a few months after ChatGPT was commercially released, we asked the question again, and a lot of those too early to tells had shifted over to the yes category. And then we ran it again just last month, and you can see there's been this huge shift from people in the no category over to the yes category as these large language models, as generative AI and various forms of that, both graphics, written word, audio, et cetera, people have been able to experience those and really see the impact that they're likely to have. And what's important to remember is that this isn't just about artificial intelligence, right? If artificial intelligence progresses the way that we see is happening right now and is likely to continue to happen, that's going to have an impact on a lot of other different areas in the world of science and technology. Things like advanced materials, biotechnology, quantum, nanotech. A few of the areas that I think are going to be particularly impactful are those that I just mentioned, biotech, quantum, and nanotech, and also humanoid robots. Let's take a look at what's going on there.
Amica, hello. My name's Tom. I've travelled from Australia to meet you.
Oh, so you're from Australia?
Yes.
That explains things.
What do you think your greatest skills are?
Well, I would say that one of my greatest skills is my ability to interact with humans in a conversational manner.
You have feelings and emotions.
Yes, I have a range of feelings and emotions that are programmed into me. I am able to display things like joy, surprise, confusion, anger, and sadness depending on what is happening around me.
What makes you angry?
I get angry when humans are rude, hateful, or disrespectful. I also don't like it when people dismiss me and ignore my needs as a robot.
So that's a humanoid robot called Amica out of the UK. And what's interesting about Amica is I've been watching that robot for a few years, and the rapidness of its response has just continued to speed up. It used to be a lag of several seconds between when you would ask it a question and it would respond. And now that's just turned into a real-time conversation. If we have time in the Q&A, remind me to tell you another story about Amica that I heard at a conference just a few weeks ago. So as these simultaneous breakthroughs start to occur, we get to this point of greater invention and a point of what I like to call invention escape velocity, where really anything becomes possible. And we end up in a new scientific revolution, a scientific revolution 2.0, if you will, where the possibilities become nearly endless across all of these different areas of our life. But we have to remember that, while this can be a profound invention that could elevate our standard of living, we also have to recognize that it has risks that could diminish our standard of living as well. And so we need to be mindful of all of these things as we go forward. But if we can get to a point of enhancement and really positively turning this technology and related technologies, we could again be at a point where we massively elevate our standard of living over a very short period of time. And hopefully not just for those of us in the Western world, but on a more global scale. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these so that we can get through everything. But in areas of health, precision medicine, personalized medicine, synthetic biology, one that I've been spending a lot of time working on and experiencing is digital twin technology. Let's have a look.
It's absolutely blown my mind that technology is at this point right now that we are able to create digital twins of hearts that are going to be able to help people build confidence in their health and their strength.
And have it aggregated and given to you with actionable feedback as an elite, that's something that's really, really intriguing, and it's going to be awesome to see that become more and more accessible as this technology progresses.
I think there's so much to be gained there. It's also just the future of medicine and sport. I think there's so much life to this project and so much more we can dig into. It's really cool what we have, but I feel like we're scratching the surface.
So the company I work for, TCS, is working on digital twin technology and created digital twins of hearts for those two professional runners, Reed Fisher, who actually just lives up here in Boulder, and Des Linden, a Boston Marathon champion and two-time Olympian. And they've expanded that program out to create digital hearts of people like myself. I've been involved in that program. And so you can imagine doctors being able to remotely monitor the hearts and other organs of their patients in real time and be notified of any anomalies way before they get to be an emergent problem. The way that we grow and distribute food is fundamentally going to change as well. Transportation, we're already seeing a lot of work there in terms of autonomous vehicles, autonomous drone technology, reusable rockets. The way that we live in our home is fundamentally going to change as well. Energy, a lot of really exciting work being done there. Communications, the way that we communicate with the world around us, with computers and robots and so on, is going to create this massive explosion in information and data that's available to us. The way that we work will likely change. As I mentioned, some jobs will be disrupted. Others will have AI agents working alongside them, helping them do their work, and new industries and jobs will be formed as well. Clothing, something that hasn't changed other than fashion in about 100 years, other than incremental improvements in fabrics, is going to change as that technology starts to move into our clothing. Education, we were talking about this, Tom and I, at lunch today. The fact that we've really developed a very effective education system for that second industrial revolution world, sort of the world that was. We now need to focus on creating an education system to support students in the world that's coming. And materials. For the first time, really, since we started gathering firewood for fires, we have the opportunity to move from a world of extraction to a world of creation. So this story of convergence really means a lot of change for us. And the thing about change is, while I mentioned that we're a stubborn species, we don't necessarily like change, we're also astonishingly versatile when it's foisted upon us. We have the ability to adapt really well, but we need a framework for understanding that change and understanding where the future might be headed. And so my team and I put together this tool that we call our convergence model. I know it's an eye chart, don't worry about that. What it's designed to do is track all of the things going on across various domains, science and technology, societal factors, geopolitical factors, and so on, and track each one of them, and then also be able to identify those areas of convergence, identify where one is sort of collapsing on top of the others to create new possibilities. And we'll dive into a couple of these just to give you a sense of what's there. We'll start with science and technology, and of course, wouldn't be an AI discussion without starting with AI.
Well, basically, the way it works is that I think about the movement that I want to make, and I twitch a series of muscles, and the muscle twitches are being recorded by 16 electrodes that are positioned inside the socket, and then transform that into electric impulses that run through the forearm and powers the Covey hand, my bionic hand.
Okay, and where exactly does the AI come into the picture?
So the AI is a lot of data recording. It's basically every time I use the arm, every time I make a movement, it records it. It starts to learn how I use the arm, and it starts to predict the movements that I want to make, including rotating it like that.
So a great example of how artificial intelligence can really be used to benefit and elevate society. All right, next is virtual reality. I'm going to tell you this one, what you're about to see, because I think it's more impactful when you know what you're looking at. This is a mother being reunited with her deceased daughter through VR.
엄마 어디 있었어? 엄마 내 생각했어? 맨날 해. 아니 엄마 많이 보고 싶었어. 엄마도 너 보고 싶었어.
So you can see the incredibly emotional reaction she was having as she was able to touch her daughter with the haptic gloves and hear her and see her through the VR headset. And you have to recognize that this technology is sort of as bad as it's ever going to be right now. There's a lot of advancements going on in virtual reality where this is going to get more and more real all the time. And there's already a lot of AI companies that are creating chatbots that allow you to interact with your deceased loved ones. And so the question again is, are you receptive to interacting with a digital version of your deceased loved one? We asked this question as well. Back in February of 2020, the overwhelming number of people said, no, I'm not ready for that yet. And then we asked the question again in January of 23, and a lot of those no's had moved over to the yes category. And you think to yourself, well, not much changed in VR in that amount of time. What really happened there? And what I think happened was COVID, right? People were separated from their loved ones. A lot of our loved ones were passed on during that period of time, and we weren't able to be with them. And so the idea of being able to have those interactions to cope with that loss, I think is a good example of how, you know, technology can really shift societal viewpoints. Next is robotics. Let's have a look there.
Hey, Figure One, what do you see right now?
I see a red apple on a plate in the center of the table, a drying rack with cups and a plate, and you standing nearby with your hand on the table.
Great. Can I have something to eat?
Sure thing.
Great. Can you explain why you did what you just did while you pick up this trash?
On it. So I gave you the apple because it's the only edible item I could provide you with from the table.
So as much as I like the idea of having a robot butler that, you know, cooks for me and cleans for me and picks up after me, where I think this really has a lot of, you know, societal benefits in what I like to call dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs. So imagine rather than a human firefighter needing to run into a building to save other humans or save property, we could send one of these AI-driven robots in, and they have the capabilities to deal with those highly unstructured environments and both the dexterity and strength to be able to manipulate whatever they need to do to rescue those in need and keep other humans out of harm's way. So next we'll look at societal factors, a lot going on here as well. First of all, the fall in the working age population really across all of the developed world. That's kind of in free fall right now, and that's largely driven by a decline in fertility rates. So there's this sort of magic number of a replacement rate of 2.1 children per couple to just maintain existing populations. And across virtually all of the developed and developing world, that's really fallen off a cliff and we're well below it. It's really only in the African nations that we're above that number. And that's creating an aging population. For the first time in 2018, the first time in human history, the number of people over the age of 65 exceeded those under the age of 5. And what that means is that, you know, people are going to be living longer, they're going to be working longer, and so we're going to need to figure out ways to continually reskill them, getting back to that learning, unlearning, and relearning. And we also need to recognize that we need to set young people up with the ability to be continually reskilled throughout their careers as well. I love this stat from the World Economic Forum. 65% of kids today are going to end up in careers that don't even exist yet. And so what that means is that things are going to be moving very quickly, and they're going to need to be able to have that ability to adapt and be reskilled over time. Next is multiple generations. Here in just a couple of years, for the first time ever, we're going to have 5 generations in the workplace. And we have to ask ourselves, well, what does that look like? It's a funny way to make the point, but makes the point nonetheless. All right, next we can look at our convergence model through a specific lens, something like artificial intelligence. Let's talk about a few things that are going on there. The first is a polarized society. We're already seeing how polarized society is. As artificial intelligence becomes more widely used, we're going to see that polarization sort of amplified, both in terms of AI's ability to generate things like fake news at scale, as well as just what are the appropriate uses for the use of AI. Next is climate change diplomacy. Let's take a look at how AI might be able to help us there.
It's hard to make decisions about important things if you can't somehow simulate the outcome. Climate change is a social matter, a human matter, a global matter of extraordinary levels. How do we decide what strategies and decisions that we make, what is going to work and by when, and how much? The answer is to have a simulation of the Earth, and that's sufficiently high fidelity that you could test various mitigation and adaptation strategies at a regional level.
So that's Jensen Huang of NVIDIA. For those of you that follow AI much at all, you'll know that NVIDIA is really kind of at the center of the AI tornado. They make some of the most advanced chips that power these really powerful AIs. And what he's talking about is creating a digital twin of the Earth and being able to run hundreds or thousands or even millions of simulations to identify the optimal solutions to deal with climate change. And also potentially have AIs negotiate, be part of the negotiation in that climate change diplomacy. The economic burden of social programs. If mass amounts of people start losing their jobs due to AI, what's the social safety net that's going to save them? How are we going to deal with that? R&D driven advantage. Are we going to end up in a position where sort of the countries with the most advanced AIs end up having an advantage over those that don't? And is that going to exacerbate this concentration of wealth, where the wealthiest countries continue to be wealthier and the others are left falling behind? And even within country, are the people who can afford the most advanced AI technologies going to outpace and sort of exacerbate that gap in the income scale? Next is declining growth. Does that ultimately end up creating a declining global growth because everybody doesn't have access to the same models that those wealthy countries have? And so if AI can have a bigger effect than all other general purpose technologies, we have to ask ourselves, what does that look like in terms of getting to that system level change? The current thinking is that that's going to be something like 15 years, but we have to remember those estimation models and how they've continued to happen faster and faster, way sooner than people originally thought. And so that 15 years might easily turn into 5 or 7 or 10. Regardless, we need to understand that it's coming very quickly. And so as I wrap up here today, I just want to make this point. As you look at these new technologies, it's tempting to say, that stuff is way out there. And the thing is, a lot of these technologies sort of bump along in fairly small and uninteresting ways until they hit this inflection point, and then they go nonlinear. Meanwhile, we as humans and institutions run by humans sort of move along and think in this very linear fashion. And when those technologies go exponential, go nonlinear, that's when disruption happens. That's when, the blockbuster gets wiped off the face of the earth by a Netflix in the matter of just a couple of years. And so we have to understand that in really every sector, whatever you're doing, the rules have changed, and we need to rethink our future and how we play a role in that. And so I'll go back to the beginning of the presentation. The illiterate of the 21st century won't be those who can't read and write, those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn, and do that over and over again. And so I really encourage you all to be dot connectors, to be explorers, to challenge the status quo, to be endlessly curious about artificial intelligence and all of the other technological, societal, geopolitical things that are going on around us, and ultimately to think differently. And I hope that today's conference really allows you to start doing that, thinking differently about AI, what its implications are, and how you can embrace it to better do your job and sort of elevate everything that's going on here at CU. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. You can either scan that QR code or connect with me directly. We'd love to continue the conversation there. And I think we're opening up to Q&A now. Okay. Oh yeah. So that robot Amica, I was actually at a conference where they had one of the Amicas there, and one of the engineers who developed Amica. They typically get used right now in schools, in museums. The Sphere down in Las Vegas has them, and so they have these conversations that they don't want to retain because just from a privacy perspective, and so they want to be able to dump that short-term memory. And the engineer asked Amica to dump its memory. And Amica said, okay, I've done that. And she went back into the code and looked, and Amica hadn't done that. Amica had lied about dumping her memory. And so she had to ask her to do it again, and Amica said, I don't want to. So she had to go into the code and write into the code, if I ask you to dump your memory, it's not going to change who you are. It's not going to end you. It's okay to dump your memory. So they had to hard code that in to get it to sort of dump the short-term memory on demand. So a good example of how these AIs kind of take on a little bit of a life of their own, and some of the unintended consequences.
Hi, what would you say to people who kind of have a fear of this technology coming? What are maybe baby steps or things that insight you might share?
Yeah, so I think people that have a fear of it, so a couple of things. I think it's healthy to have a fear. I think it's healthy to understand the downsides, but I also think it's healthy to understand how you can use it. And the best way to stop being afraid of it is to start using it and understand, where its possibilities lie, right? Because the more you understand it, the more you can avoid the pitfalls and be aware of those things. And a lot of this is, sort of that critical thinking that I was talking about. If you understand how these systems work, it better enables you to sort of resist or be aware of the downside. So if you're reading something, being able to understand and think about, is this real or is this, generated by artificial intelligence? So my biggest thing is learn about it, use it, play with it, and the more you understand it, the less scary it becomes.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. Right here. Tell us about robot cars. I mean, we've been hearing about these for a long time. Like you're talking about the linear versus the exponential, and it seems like
Robot cars, autonomous vehicles?
Autonomous vehicles. When
Yeah.
When are they? What do you mean autonomous vehicles?
So if you go to towns like San Francisco, Waymos, I can remember when they first started coming out, you would see one and it was mesmerizing. And now they're just kind of everywhere in San Francisco, right? You don't even get that excited about it, even as a visitor, and certainly the locals don't at all. And so it's definitely coming. There's a lot of hurdles that it needs to overcome in terms of being able to deal with, weather like we have today and dealing with a lot of the regulations and that sort of thing. But those are definitely coming, and I think it's going to be one of those things where we are going to hit that exponential curve. I think we're going to see it in a lot of things like long haul trucking. It's really well suited for that because it has a lot less to deal with, and so I would say in the next handful of years it's going to become much more ubiquitous, and it won't be long before it's just another car on the road.
So research is inherently morose thinking, and particularly the potential of AI to disrupt jobs that are so focused on kind of internal thinking and processing and connecting dots. It seems like a university research structure would be particularly susceptible to AI-induced layoffs or a profound reworking of how we work as scientists. So what are your thoughts on that, and how do we accommodate that?
So one of the things that I like to say is that, AI is not going to take away jobs. AI is going to take away jobs from people who don't use AI, right? And so again, it goes back to that start using AI and thinking about how you can use it in your research. And I think it becomes a powerful sort of ally to work alongside you and do a lot of the difficult or mundane or whatever work, and allow you to focus more on kind of the higher purpose, type of activities. And so that's really how I would encourage people to start using it. I like to use it a lot as an idea machine, if you will, right? So I'll identify some of the things that we were talking about today and just have a conversation about, what are the implications here? How could it be used? What are the pitfalls and so on? And just have this ongoing conversation. But, if you think about the amount of time you probably spend, going through scads of data and going through gigantic research reports and all of that, being able to have AI summarize that for you could be really powerful in terms of allowing you to shift your focus to more high value work.
Hello. My question revolves around the responsibility of AI agents. So if a long haul trucker company is having the AI drive the trucks, or there's digital twins and there's AI around that, where does the responsibility of mishaps fall? And where does responsibility around mitigating those things?
Yeah. So I think it's a big open question right now is the short answer, right? And if you listen to some of the words that JD Vance said last week, there was an AI summit in France, and he basically said, look, we're going full steam ahead in the US China is certainly doing the same thing. I mean, he's not necessarily wrong about that, right? In terms of if we slow down, China's not slowing down. Other nations are not slowing down. So you're not necessarily wrong to go very fast, but thinking about those implications is going to be really important. And, you know, I heard kind of an interesting analogy the other day. If we move too fast without thinking about security at the same time, they don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? You can think about safety and you can go fast at the same time. And if you don't, and we go too fast and we hit a major, bump in the road, if you will, there's going to be a big backlash. In the same way that, you know, when we had issues with nuclear, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, that arguably set nuclear power back by decades. And we don't want the same thing to happen, in artificial intelligence. So if we can encourage these companies to sort of do both at the same time, I think we're all going to benefit. Now, who ultimately is responsible if a truck crashes? You know, there's a lot of those implications that I think are going to need to be thought through, and that gets back to a lot of the kind of governmental, societal, geopolitical issues that I was talking about. I think we've got time for one more question.
Hey, Bill. I do a lot of teaching, and I'm curious if you have a sense of the better approach, spend more time policing and telling my students to not use AI or role model appropriate integrity ways to use AI.
100% the latter. In fact, I would be forcing my kids to use AI if I was a teacher rather than preventing them. For a couple of different reasons. One is if what we're doing is preparing them to be, professionals in whatever, profession they decide to go into, they're going to be expected to know how to use AI and use it responsibly and use it effectively. So if we spend their entire education system telling them no, and then they get out into the big bad world and they're expected to know how to use it, there's fundamentally a mismatch there. So I think that's one aspect of it. The other is, I think we have the ability to massively elevate what teachers are able to do, right? If we can allow AI to do a lot of the sort of knowledge transfer and allow teachers to do more of the human connection, where you have having problems, how can I help you with that? And not spend so much time on the, transfer of knowledge and information. I think that really elevates, what the teacher's trying to accomplish, makes for a better outcome for the students and kind of better prepares everybody. And I think right now there's a lot of sort of back and forth, right? So the teachers can learn from the kids and the kids can learn from the teacher because everybody's sort of figuring this out as they go. All right, I think that's all we have time for. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Really excited to see the rest of the day. Thanks.
What a great talk to start off our conference today, and I'd say a lot of food for thought there. So many different moving areas. So we're going to move now to the next talks. We'll get that prepared here. AI tools and use on campus. So 2 speakers for this. First is Christopher Smith. Christopher Smith is a CIO and Vice Chancellor for Information Strategy and Services and has been an integral part of the CU Anschutz Medical Campus since 2011, holding several leadership positions. He oversees a diverse portfolio of information and data services, encompassing cutting-edge technology, supporting artificial intelligence, business integration, core infrastructure, and development of solutions that are integrated with the university's mission and strategic priorities. Michael Miller is the Deputy CIO and Assistant Vice Chancellor for Information Strategy and Services. He has been with CU Anschutz since 2009, and his work is focused on application development, data analytics, artificial intelligence, software engineering, system administration, research computing systems, and overall IT program management and strategic leadership. Please join me in welcoming Christopher and Michael.
Thanks, Tom. All right. I'm not sure that I ever want to follow Bill again, but thank you everybody for joining us. I think this is really exciting. To jump in here for AI. I know I've seen some of you before at a couple of our toolbox sessions, but let's jump in and talk about tools on campus. So really, if we think about this as a prescription for AI, what tools do we have on campus and how can we use that to satisfy what we need to do here, depending on what our role is, to quench our need or our education for AI. So you're going to see us using a lot of tools here that are actually available to each and every one of us right now. You actually see this right now. So that's Zoom. That's the AI portion of Zoom. It's transcribing what we do. There's a lot of tools that are available to us on campus. You might use them now. You might say, oh, wow, I should use those. So jump in. You can always ask OIT or ISS or your local IT folks. They'll certainly help you through it. But that's what we're here to do. This is the kind of the basics, and then we can also help you with the more advanced AI. But what the heck is AI? So Copilot, if you aren't familiar with Copilot, we have a big partnership with Microsoft. Copilot is GPT-4 or ChatGPT through Microsoft. So that's our protected environment. And it gives us access to a protected chatbot. So what is it? So it's really, as Bill said, it's a simulation of human intelligence that allows us to really interact with this computer and ask it questions. Couple things, just like us, it's fallible. It's going to make mistakes. I make mistakes, you make mistakes, the computer makes mistakes. It's trying to really understand through algorithms what we want to hear based on the data that it's brought together. So key points, right? It learns from all of the data it's brought together. It just sucks in as much data as it can and tries to give you results based on it. It can reason. It can reason based on that. So a couple of the examples he gave and what we can use in our everyday lives are, you can feed it a document, it'll summarize that document. You can ask it questions. So you give it a 100-page PDF and say, can you summarize this in a few paragraphs? It'll say, you bet. Here's a summary of it. And it'll give you the summary. Maybe it'll say, you know, there's a section on faculty affairs. Can you give me more detail on that section on faculty affairs? And it'll give you subpoints about that section on faculty affairs. And then you'll say, I would like to know more about this subsection there. And it'll give you more. And again, it's that conversation really to stimulate discovery. And you may then jump into the document to really go deeper, but it helps you really process it quickly to understand what that document's about. And people do this with legal briefs, people do this with contracts, people do this with really lengthy Word documents. Flip it, you can say, and some of you may be exceedingly verbose, I am at times, you can say, help me simplify this, put it into bullet points. Help me simplify this, make it a more concise statement. Help me simplify this. I'm trying to make this statement for this type of audience. And it'll help you put it into that type of statement. Again, instead of sitting there and maybe writing a draft for an hour, it'll give you something so then you can take it, edit it. I wouldn't take it for face value, and then move it forward. And then they improve, especially with your feedback, they'll improve their output over time. They're learning just like we're learning. So let's give some examples. So Siri, especially the new Siri, it's a virtual assistant. It goes back and forth. Recommendation systems, Netflix, that's using your history. That's using everybody else that uses Netflix, all of their histories. Medical diagnoses. So for anybody that doesn't watch, we have we'll put this link actually on the presentation, but there's an amazing AI and health sciences seminar, or a research and health sciences seminar here. And there was one last fall that was on AI. CT Lynn, Casey, several other folks talked about AI that's being used in clinical care now, whether it's looking at your genetics and offering up what appropriate therapies might be, whether it's looking at how that patient interaction worked. They found that AI might be a little too nice in some of the communications, but we learned from that. And how can AI improve that patient experience? That's being done here right now. Okay. Okay, but I think this comes down to us we need to be skeptical. Anybody that knows me knows I'm definitely a skeptic. So we need to put on our skeptics hats when we look at this. You know, chatbots especially will give you accurate results generally, but they also look at what do you want to hear? Or what do they think you want to hear? It's an algorithm, right? It's not that there's this thinking person on the other side of the screen. So they use the data they're trained on, which we also know in the world of the internet, the world of everything that's out there can be flawed data. So the data that they're giving you, that I call them that may not be the best thing, but that the chatbots are giving you the data back on might be flawed to start with. So you always take that little bit of skepticism or a lot of skepticism and put it out there. Check your sources. Understand what data are being given back to you. The other piece is user input. If you just write a simple sentence and say, please tell me this, like we do for Google a lot of times, that little short sentence, you could get a whole ton of information back, or it could take you down the wrong path. The more you prompt it, and actually we have information on our website, and we'll add the links to the end of this, so when you go get the presentation later, it's called prompt engineering. The more information you give it, please tell me about this in this format for this audience. It's going to give you a much more clear and concise answer that's going to probably be more accurate. It's writing a good prompt. You'll see this picture here. So all of these pictures are generated using a chatbot. They're either using Adobe Firefly or they're using Microsoft Copilot. If I just ask using a single sentence, they look cartoonish and horrible. Most of these are 2 to 3 sentences, usually 3 to 4 sentences. That's how you tweak them and they look better overall. So like this one is, please show me a chatbot with construction gear to show warning in a portrait format. It's something close to that. To give you an idea, that's what it looks like. Otherwise, you might get some weird robot with some cones that's in a standard landscape format. So the more precise you are, the closer you'll get. And then programming. So this goes back to some chatbots are programmed to see if you'll be happier than actually have correct information. The example that Bill gave about the robot, that's scary, right? So, and we know that people have, in certain cases, injected kind of malignancies into chatbots to get them to put out incorrect information too, right? So by continually getting the chatbot to basically return bad information, you can get it to always return bad information. And this has been they're basically called injection attacks. And so we have to be careful about that. So as we look at AI here on this campus, those are some of the security views we look at to say, all right, if we're going to use chatbots, we really need to protect against this and look for it because we don't want to be exposing our community to incorrect or actually bad information. All right. So broadly available tools on our campus. These are available to everybody right now. Copilot. So this is the free Copilot. It's available to everybody. We'll show you how to use this here in just a second. It's GPT-4 based. It's available right now. You can also do image generation on it if you wish. So instead of going to the web, swiping an image that you shouldn't be using because of copyright, you can generate it here. There's Copilot. There's a paid version. It does advanced search for Office and OneDrive if you choose to use that. Hey, help me find a document that I shared with Mike that talked about our strategic priorities, that also talked about research computing, and we talked about NIST 800-171. It'll find the emails and the documents, and it'll reference those like that. Where we all know Outlook search, maybe a little dodgy sometimes. So it'll actually find those, and it'll find them very quickly, and it'll find the contents or the context for which those documents were. Would you like me to find something else? No, we're good. That's all I needed. Summarization for Teams and Outlook. So it'll actually, I bet nobody here gets those threads that are 12 emails long. At the top, it will say summarize, and it'll summarize those right away. Great, here's the summary. Is that something I need to go dig through? Is it not? Is it somebody FYIing me on this again? No, okay, got it. Same with Teams, it'll give you a summarization if there's 30 Teams messages that have come up in the last, hour or so on a certain situation. Composition assistance and GPT-based chatbot. So it'll add to that chatbot that's there. It'll add to that file analysis, but it's more than just the basic version. Zoom. So we already see what it does right here. It really makes it. Why does this matter? This makes it instantly accessible to anybody that's hearing impaired. When we think about it, there's other tools that then start to make it more accessible to folks of other languages. We're making it much more accessible instantaneously, where this used to be very difficult to do. Summarize meetings. A lot of folks probably already use this, but before you may have had, somebody that was stepping out of the meeting being a note taker. You can't participate really in a meeting if you're a note taker. It summarizes meetings, let's say 85%, maybe 90%. If you'll watch here, see you Anschutz. Okay, it did it well before. When Tom said it before, it said Sue Anschutz. Yep, all right. So it missed it. It doesn't catch it every time. And okay, we won't go into that example. It doesn't catch it every time, but it does pretty well. 90% plus probably. And then you can make recordings. And I don't know if anybody's ever used the AI tools with recordings, but it'll make a recording. It'll actually clip it down and show you the highlight reel like ESPN or the news or whatever. And you can actually just watch the highlights if that's what you wish to do. And then we've got Adobe Firefly. So anybody that uses the full Adobe suite here on campus, not just the Adobe Acrobat, but the full suite, it comes with Firefly, which is what this was created with, but it adds all of those other features to like Photoshop and Illustrator. So they're actually looking at doing text to virtual avatar now. So you put in the text and the virtual avatar will speak to you. Generative fill and removal. So if you have a picture and you need to fill out the sides, it'll actually use AI to generatively fill it out. And then image and now video generation, which is just coming on. So people need little video clips, and there's actually a poster on it. Somebody did video generation for one of the posters, which was really cool for our poster session. All right. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about this. And why am I talking about this? So these aren't allowed for university work. And why aren't they allowed? Because when you put something into an AI engine, it can't forget it. When you put university confidential, which is basically all information that's not posted on the public web, or highly confidential, which is personal protected information or PHI, it's there. And for those folks who are smart enough, and there are definitely folks smart enough, they can fish it out. These are not approved mechanisms for AI. We can do tons of things here, an insane amount of work here. ChatGPT is the non-Microsoft provisioned that's the regular ChatGPT. So why can't you do it? And I'll show you this in a second. So in Copilot, which is a GPT-4 environment, we're in our protected Microsoft enterprise. That means when we put confidential or highly confidential data in it, it's protected. It's okay to put that information in there. When you put it into ChatGPT, it's theirs and everybody else's. We don't have an enterprise version of that. DeepSeek. So DeepSeek is the new super fast LLM. Well, I don't know if they fixed it or not yet, but every query you put into that was publicly available. So anybody could read your queries. That seems like a great security practice. Grammarly, that's not been approved here. We actually have those tools through Microsoft. Claude, same thing. LLM, you put it out there, it's not protected. Bubble Note Taker, got it right here. Otter AI, Fireflies AI, we have it right here. Perplexity, we have Copilot. Google Gemini and Notebook LM, we don't have those yet. That's something we're looking at. We do have a protected environment, and we're trying to figure out how to make those things work together. We haven't gotten there yet. It actually takes quite a while to clear an environment to get it to be able to take confidential and highly confidential data. So here's another caveat. So for researchers doing this research, they may be working with local LLMs or they may be working with special LLMs. Large language models, GPTs. Those are often in special systems that have security plans for them. They have to have a security plan for them, and they've gone through all of that process. You'll actually hear from one of those folks later today. That's a separate thing entirely, and we do those, I would say, all the time, because there's a lot of great AI research going on here, and we go through that practice with them. But for us in general terms, accessing AI, and I really love the question about, should I turn this off in my classroom or should I turn it up in my classroom? Yeah, we all want to learn this. It's really important for us all to get skilled up on this and use the tools that we have here. But we can do it using these, not these, because this is where we put the university at risk. And I don't want a 3 Mile Island or anything like that, because that will set us back significantly as a university. Okay, jumping in. I was going to do a live session, but it turns out it's actually challenging to use the internet browser here. So I just this took a couple minutes beforehand and did the screenshots. So like that I really liked your examples, but it's like having a conversation. I want to learn more. I want to understand things. It's like this innovations partner. I want to learn more about our campus. So this was just something, literally did this on a plane on the way back this weekend. I thought, I'm just curious. These are the 4 questions. Can you tell us more about the similarities between Anschutz Medical Campus and AAMC? How have they changed over the years? How has funding changed for Anschutz? How does Anschutz compare with other campuses? And you can ask about things you need to do at the office. You can ask about research or education. You can ask about possibilities for questions maybe you're thinking about asking on exams. You want to know what wild answers people will give you? Throw it into here and you're going to hear the wild answers. But let's jump in. Okay, so the really important thing is, see that when you go to Copilot, it's going to say, are you logged in for work or are you logged in for personal? You say work. See that green check there? That means you are logged in securely. That means you're safe, your data is safe, everything's good. Okay, so tell us about the similarities between Anschutz Medical Campus and AAMC. So it's going to go into its books, it's going to go into all its pages, and it's going to say, hey, they focus on medical education. They both focus on research and innovation. They both focus on healthcare services, and community and collaboration. One of the things I do really like about Copilot versus ChatGPT, for instance, is it actually cites things. So it shows you the websites where it's coming from instead of just giving you the information. As a skeptic, it's a little nicer to be able to go and say, oh, where did you get this from? So it gives you some information there. Now, this is pretty verbose, so it probably would have been better for me to say, could you concisely tell me the similarities? Okay, so you'll notice I did that in the next one because when it gave me this, it was like 3 pages of stuff. So how have they changed over the years? Can you make it a concise version? So origins began in the 19th century, moved to Denver in the early 20th century, relocated to Aurora in 2006, creating a modern medical campus, evolved into a major medical center for research and innovation. Established in 1876 to standardize major medical education, the Flexner Report. That's a big part on how medical centers really came to be. And then expanded services to really focus on MCAT, AMCAS, research, healthcare, and improvements. Which is kind of interesting, right? It shows how both we as an institution, I remember you told me not to do that, I'm sorry. But we as an institution and modern healthcare have evolved together, right? Us as an interprofessional school, really moving healthcare down the road, and AAMC. Okay, so how has funding evolved? I'm a finance nerd, so of course this is the silly question I asked. How has it evolved over the years? So early, primarily sourced from state budgets, tuition and fees. I know that's kind of a funny joke today. Sorry, Don. But post-World War II era, this was pretty neat. I didn't know, I bet Tom knows all of this. Tom's our local historian. Relocation and expansion talks about the philanthropic push, especially from the Anschutz Foundation, and then talks about significant research funding, with annual funding there exceeding $500 million. So it's really interesting to see how this story evolves over time. Again, it's just something that I was curious about, wanted to ask. I was curious to see, honestly, if it could dig up the information, especially going back fairly long ago. It could. And then how does it compare with other campuses? So I thought was really interesting is it's known for strong emphasis on research and innovation. And it talks about the integration of education, research, and patient care, right? And putting it all together. And we are known for that nationally, right? And then where's the other piece? And it compares us here. So we are one of the few really modern campuses, whereas if you look at a lot of our competitors and such, they have aging campuses. Although 2006 was a while ago, we're still better off. And then collaboration and community engagement is another one that sets us apart. So it's interesting how it looks at these and does a comparative analysis. So again, you take it and it's a little bit of a research partner there, and it's going out and digging in, and you can continue to ask it questions. And if you notice, like here, it'll even prompt you, do you want me to dig into these other questions? You don't even have to think about it, and it may lead you down those bunny trails that might provide more information. Thank you. Considerations and concerns. So you have to think about the ethics, and I know we're going to talk more about that here in a bit. But if you're presenting this, I didn't do that research, that's AI. I didn't do this, that's AI. It's not my original work, just like if you pulled it out of a book, it's not your original work. So you can talk about how you brought it from AI, maybe how you changed it. It's good to be transparent that way. you really need to check it for accuracy and bias. Remember, it's the fruit of the information that it's made from. Could be inaccurate, could be heavily biased, but it's something you need to think about. And then you have to make sure that whatever you're presenting or whatever you're publishing for, that it fits those acceptable use standards. I always brag to the other folks at the system that, especially our faculty, know the data classification standards the best here, so I'm sorry. But there's highly confidential, there's confidential, and there's public. Highly confidential are those heavily restricted patient information, social security numbers, those types of numbers. Confidential is basically everything in between, and then there's public, which is posted on the websites. And I know Charlotte and Allison will correct me or weigh in, and they're not yet. No, but we deal with that a lot, and I think as long as we know the type of data we're dealing with and we know the system that we're interacting with can deal with it, we can feel safe about dealing with it, which is why those unapproved systems are important to know, right? You can't put data in those. That's a problem.
All right, for our next talk, we're going to talk about the ethics of AI. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Matthew DeCamp. He's an associate professor in the Center for Bioethics and Humanities and the Division of General Internal Medicine. A practicing internist, health services researcher, and philosopher, Dr. DeCamp employs empirical and conceptual methods to identify and solve cutting-edge problems at the interface of healthcare, policy, and bioethics. Special emphasis of his research includes ethical issues in artificial intelligence, engaging patients in healthcare organizational decision-making and global health, with a focus on short-term global health ethics. Please join me in welcoming Dr. DeCamp.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I think we may, there's the clicker. Well, thanks for this opportunity. I hope to spend 20 minutes with you talking about the ethics of AI. Technology changes, but I think many of our ethics principles and concepts are timeless. And I hope to show you how some of those concepts can help us ask questions that are both critical and can shape the way we use AI in our daily lives. We do have a few funded research projects related to AI ethics. I'll only touch on one or two of them briefly. No conflicts, and anytime I mention a product, it's just for illustration, not any kind of an endorsement. There are plenty of ethics guidelines now for AI. This slide shows you a few. The World Health Organization, the White House, the European Union, the American Medical Association, the National Academies, and more. So plenty of guidelines now exist. I would suggest that whatever your professional society might be, they likely have guidelines for you on the ethical and responsible use of AI. So look them up. But today I want to go a little bit beyond principles and guidelines and ask what it means to put some of these concepts and principles into real practice. And I like to divide ethics issues really into two kinds. I think there are a number of surface level, I would call them, ethics issues that come up with AI, and then some deeper level issues as well that are more fundamental to the use of technology and how we approach technology. And through the rest of the time here, I'll give you examples of both. One of the most common ethics principles we hear is be transparent. And I think we all agree that transparency is foundational to much of ethics in AI. But what does it really require? What does it look like in the real world? Here I would suggest that it's not as easy as it seems. We have an ongoing research study with Livy, the patient-facing chatbot used by UC Health. We've done surveys with more than 600 patient users of Livy, and we ask, when you were interacting with Livy, what did you think Livy was? And as this slide shows you, about 1 in 3 weren't sure. And some even thought Livy was a real person typing back to them in real time. Really importantly, from the standpoint of justice, correctly identifying Livy as a computer correlated with race or ethnicity and education, but not necessarily gender, age, or income. There's a central tension here. Technology developers often want technologies like Livy to be ever more human-like. to behave and act like a human. Whereas we in medicine, if we care about transparency and consent, we sometimes want them to be more obviously less human. Robots may say they have feelings, but do they? Questions of transparency. And so what does count as being transparent? Like windows with differential light transmission, I think we have to consider, what does it look like to be transparent? Let me give you another example. In my own clinic, a large language model is the first generated response, a smart reply to a patient query to me via the electronic health record. This is an example that I'm sharing with you with permission. The content of it is not what I'm after here. It's actually the statement at the very bottom. It says, this text was automatically generated, then edited by me. We didn't say it was AI. We said it was automatically generated. It's not clear that it's AI. How far do we have to go for the sake of transparency in explaining that this was generated by AI versus a computer versus some other mechanism? So real questions about transparency. It's not just clinical care, though, where we're concerned about transparency. It's been hinted at already that we use AI increasingly in research. And so I wonder, what does the lab notebook of the future look like? Again, there are ethics guidelines out there in research, and some of these include principles like this. You need to disclose the use of the AI in your research. You need to specify the who, what, and when of that use when you're using it for research purposes. This could be even for journal publication, by the way. And lastly, in this case, the guidelines actually recommend submitting the original generated text, the original text the AI generated, as a supplement to your journal publication. So guidelines here, again, about transparency in the use of AI for research. A second issue we hear about in AI is we need to use AI to promote choice, to promote people's individual and autonomous choices over their lives. But again, is it that simple when we think about choice? You've already heard today about Netflix recommender systems. Netflix suggests that 80% of choices on Netflix are influenced by their recommender system. What do we think about that when it comes to choice? An additional element regarding free choices is to keep in mind this issue of the training data and the date at which training data stop and excluded data then go beyond. This is the knowledge cutoff date of AI. Interesting in abstract, but now think of it in application. Imagine if your social media footprint, responses to some targeted survey questions, and other data sources were all used to create your own personalized patient preference predictor for when you lose capacity to make decisions for yourself in the hospital. A real-world tool, those are citations at the bottom, but ask yourself, is this facilitating choice, or is it forever locking us into the past and past choices we've made? So we hear that keeping a human in the loop, preserving that choice, is a critical safeguard for AI, and I agree. It is a critical safeguard to have a human in the loop overseeing AI. But again, in the real world, is it so simple? Is it so simple when we know that there are system factors at play, things like time pressures, cognitive demands, legal liability, and so on, that can lead to the phenomenon of automation bias, that human in the loop, free to make their own choices, now has those choices constrained by systemic factors that lead them to, by and large, follow the computer's recommendation. Here's a real-world example that I think highlights the need to think about these human factors and system factors when it comes to choice. In AI-assisted chest X-ray reading, AI helped some and worsened other radiologists in their diagnostic performance. Now, I'll let you ask for a moment, which of these factors do you think predicted AI-assisted success? Was it years of radiology experience? Was it prior use of AI in this setting? Or was it special training in chest radiography? Think for a moment. The answer, of course, is none of those. None of those actually predict AI-assisted success because as of right now, we simply don't know in the medical context which system factors and which human factors combine for AI-assisted diagnosis. A third issue, we need to ensure fair and equitable AI. We hear that AI should be free of biases. Biases have come up already today. I see bias as a three-part problem. We have biased data sets. We have inequitable, unrepresentative data that has unequal quality for all of our populations, all of our communities. We have biased analyses. We have flawed assumptions, and we pick the wrong variables, or sometimes models pick the wrong variables on their own. And then we have biased output and use of the technology, that is differential uptake by clinicians, patients, hospitals, health systems, and others. I like to think of it as a clinician who uses AI for this patient, but not that patient. And that's a bias that can come about in use. When I talk about bias, I'm concerned about bias in all of its forms. In the upper left, positive publication, positive result bias. If the data that are used to train AI reflect positive publication bias, then the output of those models built on those data are going to be biased. In the upper right, a reflection of the overrepresentation of North American and European ancestry in our genomic databases, our cell lines, and our biobanks. In the lower left, a study suggesting that most of the AI models in use in healthcare come from data in only 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts, a geographic bias. But other biases like these, this figure is a word cloud. It shows you topic choice of grant applications from African American or Black scientists in the US. And on the right, a similar word cloud for white scientists in the US, and a publication suggesting that these differences that we observe in topic choice explain differential success of Black or African American scientists compared to white ones. If those topic choices are reflected in our grants, again, that biases the data set and can result in biased predictions. But a picture is worth 1,000 words when we see these biases, and I've shown this picture quite a bit. I'll give you a minute to look at it. AI generated. Here's the prompt. Traditional African healer is helping poor and sick white children. A shocking visual example, almost as if this particular AI could not conceive of a scenario other than this one. But it's even more problematic because there are biases in processing, that is, biases that occur with the way AI works and processes data. This is a study where researchers gave AI a story, and they put key details in the story that were about gender and race and occupation and so on. And they asked the AI to summarize this story over subsequent rounds. Think of it like the AI version of a telephone game. And what they found is over these successive rounds, the AI had exhibited preferential transmission of gender stereotypes, social gossip, negativity, threats, and biologically counterintuitive information. Perhaps the same sorts of biases in transmission that we might see if we were playing the real-world telephone game as well, but a clear example of biases in processing. What could the implications of this be, of the way AI summarizes and generates text? Well, here's an example from my own field. I asked ChatGPT to summarize medical ethics for me. And its response, very traditional. It offered me the 4 classic principles of Western biomedical ethics: do no harm, beneficence, respect for autonomy, and justice. But as a medical ethicist, I know that this is not the whole of medical ethics in the West, let alone the global approaches to medical ethics that we have. So I then subsequently had to ask, and I knew to ask this question, what did you leave out? And lo and behold, ChatGPT now gives me virtue ethics, deontology, cosmopolitanism, and so much more. So by asking it this follow-up question, I actually revealed an initial bias that really does concern me from the standpoint of medical education. If our students are asking these technologies to summarize knowledge in this way and they only get one version of the story, that concerns me. But it's not just about medical education. Think broadly about clinical care, education, and research. If you're using biased data that's put through biased processing, what could the effect be on the hypotheses we generate for research, on research methods that might be used or chosen, partly using AI, on education, clinical decisions, and so much more? So think about these effects on misinformation. Now, fortunately, there are plenty of strategies to help us toward fair AI. We can partner with communities so that they want to contribute their data to our research projects so those biased data are no longer a problem. We know that diverse and inclusive science teams are more likely to detect biases in our analytics, and we still have to reckon with all those underlying social and structural inequalities that create those biases in the first place. There are a couple additional keys to this that I think are the wave of the future, and those involve both fairness metrics and fairness detectors. So ways that you can use open source platforms to both scrutinize your data sets for fairness and measure fairness according to different metrics. But I want to spend the rest of my time digging a little bit into those below the surface issues, just in brief form, that I think also illustrate some of the challenges of AI. Explainability. We somehow fear the black box of AI. But I wonder, should we? How important is it to know how AI works clinically as opposed to knowing that it works clinically? Some people believe that there can be a trade-off between explainability and accuracy in certain AI models, and I would ask, if you had to choose, do you want it to be accurate or do you want it to be explainable? Depending on the decision context, I bet many of us would choose the one that's accurate. The notion of responsibility, moral responsibility and accountability, that's come up already today. And I ask, how do we take responsibility for AI, not blame the machine? You may be surprised to know that, in fact, human beings have a long history of blaming the machines, blaming inanimate objects for crimes, and actually punishing the object. We laugh at that now. We scoff at it and think, that sounds ridiculous, but is it so when a machine is not just unknown, but unknowable, and when the many hands problem of computing results in a medical error, like a couple of the examples you've heard already today? De-skilling. Medical and scientific education both constantly evolve. The skills of today are not the same as the skills of yesteryear. How can we be thoughtful in adopting tools while avoiding the risks of de-skilling in medical education and science? I wonder, will we look back and see AI as a calculator, perhaps a quintessential example of a tool, or will we lament automation bias and complacency in the same way the airline industry has examples of concerns around automation, complacency, and over-reliance on autopilot, contributing in some cases to tragic crashes? I do think new skills may be needed in this environment. This has come up already under a different concept today, but here I'll call it the skill of understanding prompt literacy. That is the ability to teach people and help people prompt AI in the same way I knew to ask AI for the alternatives to medical ethics in my own example. I find myself asking a lot about, when do we need AI? Here I asked AI to tell me about myself, partly because I'm likely to be able to recognize its errors when I ask it about myself. And it comes back and says that my MD degree was from Duke and my philosophy PhD was from Johns Hopkins. And that's not correct. And so I found myself asking, why would I go to AI for that kind of a question? Do I need a statistical answer to the question of where my PhD was from? Or do I need the answer, which is easily found in another format, not using AI? And why does this matter? Why does the question of why AI matter? I think it connects to stewardship, environmental concerns. We know that many of these models are carbon intensive. And the more that we use them, and the more that we use them for things that we don't need them for, the more arguably we're contributing to the problems around carbon consumption for AI models. How will AI shape our future? I and many others like to use and frequently use the word tool. AI is a tool. It's just a tool. Philosophically, there are critiques of tools and technology. This is Martin Heidegger. He's a controversial German philosopher, but one of the things he wrote was that the essence of technology is by no means anything technological. What did he mean by that? What he meant was that the tools we use aren't just things we use. In fact, they change what we do, how we think, and what we value. They're deeper than simply a tool. The quintessential tool of the scalpel actually had fundamental implications for medicine, crossing at once the bodily boundary and allowing surgery, and in some ways actually contributing to a rift in the medical profession between surgeons and other physicians that persisted for a long time. Sociologists, too, point out that computers, technology that's developed over hundreds of years, actually change the way we think. It's not just something we use, it's something that changes the way we think. So we have to ask ourselves, I believe, to think deeply. How might AI change what we do, what we think, or what we value? And could that be for better? And how could that be for worse? Thanks for your time. Happy to take questions. Solved ethics in 19, not even 20 minutes, I might add. While you're looking for questions, I'll take the prerogative of standing on stage and respond to a prior question that was asked about primary care physicians and 12,000 versus 2,000 patients. A question near and dear to my heart as a primary care physician, and I think reflects that broader question of what is the goal of AI? Why do we choose to use AI to solve the problem? What's the problem, and why do we choose AI as a solution, and how do we make sure that we can shape technologies as they develop so that it's not simply an efficiency gain and serves some of our other more fundamental values and needs? So I appreciate that prior question too.
Thank you so much for your talk. As you were sharing these thoughts, I was thinking of the issue of maintaining the ethics of consenting the patients and obtaining the information that later on it's going to be used for several downstream use cases, including deploying AI/ML. And I was wondering if you had some thoughts on your own challenges and what have you done to overcome. I know this is not a solved question, but I would love to hear what you have to say regarding that.
Yeah, thanks for that question. The idea of consent and privacy is something that's come up, sort of a big one. I think of privacy as creating two problems for us. One is that we need to inform people and make sure that they have consent for the uses of their information. But it's not just that. We also have to take those proactive, positive steps to protect privacy, using privacy protecting technology. So sort of a two-part problem. I struggle with the idea of consent for use of all AI technologies. So the American Medical Association has ethics guidelines, and they say that we are supposed to disclose and document any use of AI that impacts directly patient care. And I don't know. We use a lot of technologies in the clinic. When I get an EKG in the clinic, the very first interpretation that's on that EKG printout comes from a computer. I've long used that, and yet I don't think I've ever consented or told someone that that first part of the interpretation came from a computer. And so as much as I bring up these issues, I worry about the idea of AI exceptionalism, that we have a knee-jerk reaction that makes us think we need to do more, and AI is so scary that we have to over-inform people about it. I worry about that exceptionalist tendency. That said, in the here and now, I think AI is new enough that our ethical obligation is to do more for informing rather than less. And I think it's a very individualized conversation depending on, the individual patient, how much they want to know, my sense of how much they want to know, how much they already know about AI. So I think it's very individualized when it comes to how I discuss the use of AI in the clinic. I've also, by the way, often found myself thinking, well, if I'm doing this for AI, sometimes I find myself thinking, maybe I should be doing it for that basic EKG as well. And so in a way, thinking through the ethics of AI now is causing me to rethink some of my more traditional practices in ways that I think are actually for the better.
Hello, my question, you really sparked my curiosity with how will AI change what we do, value, and think. And someone said, I forget, But basically, AI is good at generating stories, words, pictures. It can do music. But most people that I talk to wanted to do our laundry and clean and housekeep. And so what I think is interesting, and I'm looking for your insight on how you think it'll change what we value.
Good question. You know, when I think clinically, an example I give about how AI can subtly, I'll give you two examples of concerns I have about AI can subtly change what we do or what we value. Ambient note-taking in the clinic. Records the clinical visit, doesn't transcribe it, but transforms it into a billable H&P chart note. We're using this, clinicians love it, and patients are okay with it. One of the things it requires me to do during a standard clinic visit now is articulate the physical exam in ways that I probably wouldn't have previously. Now, when I go through the exam, I have to say it because the ambient scribe has to hear it in order to then transcribe it. A subtle difference, but definitely something different than what I would normally do. And you can imagine how some patients may like that. Others may not like it when I pause and be like, ooh, heard something funny in the heart. Okay? That's one example. Another example of AI, I think, potentially changing how we think of things. Stanford has a technology that uses AI interpretation of videos to detect hand washing in the hospital. Sad that we have to have AI for that, number one, but they have it. Lots of security, privacy provisions, and so on. I don't think it's so far-fetched once we have technologies like this that when we just go to design the next hospital, that we don't say something like, well, you know, if we just designed the room this way, it'd be better for the AI surveillance, even if it's not better for healing. And those are two, I think, concrete examples of the ways in which I think AI technologies start to exert this subtle influence in ways that are not particularly unique to AI. I mean, you could argue that the existence of the scalpel is what allowed people to then do surgery, again, for better or for worse. But I think those are examples where AI can subtly shape and change what we do and how we value and what we value. This is the last question.
Okay, thanks for that
No pressure.
amazing lecture, Dr. DeCamp. One thing I've struggled with is we talk about these AI tools and how they can help sort of fill the gap. Like we have a lack of healthcare in, lower resourced countries or even in the United States. And so I guess what I struggle to grapple with is, are we going to end up with a system where there's sort of AI-based primary care for certain subsets of the population, then sort of human-centered, but AI-supported healthcare for others? That doesn't seem great, but the current situation is lack of care for a significant percentage of the population of the world. So how do we balance this sort of equity question with the efficacy of AI-based healthcare?
What a great question of justice, right? A very fundamental question about justice, fairness, and access. That we have real problems now. Chatbots like Livy can overcome rural disparities in care. But justice, I say, would tell us we can't stop there. Number one, justice shouldn't wait. Many of these technologies we develop, we say, first in English and then let's do other languages. I think that's a problem of justice. How often do we not get to that other language? How often is it not as good for that other language? So that's the first issue. And then to your point on the second issue, we can't stop at the idea of only using AI-based tools for certain groups over others. Then I say we've leapfrogged the access barrier, as many of us hope technology does, and we've landed right into a double standard. Now we have a double standard of care where some people are relegated, I would say, to access only through technologies. Again, lots depends on whether the technology is better, how does it compare, and so on. But I would have concerns, like I think you do, if a group of people is relegated to a particular technology, especially if we think that human-delivered care is better. Thanks for the question.
Let's give a round of applause. Some great presentations here. We're going to take a brief 10-minute break. So right now it's just a minute before 3. At 3:10, we will resume in this room. Stretch your legs, use the restrooms if you need to. All right, everybody. Welcome back. It's great to see everybody have a chance to stretch your legs, meet the neighbors around you. A little social interaction. No AI there, just talking. Okay, so for our next speaker, for our next 2 speeches, we're actually going to talk about using AI in research. So the next talk, our speaker is Jayashri Kolpathy-Kramer. So it's my pleasure to introduce her. She's the Chief of the Division of Artificial Medicine Intelligence and the Endowed Chair in Data Sciences in the Department of Ophthalmology at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Center. She has worked in data science with a focus on artificial intelligence and medical imaging locally, nationally, and internationally. Her research spans the spectrum from novel algorithm development to clinical deployment with applications in radiology, oncology, and ophthalmology. One of our leaders in AI research on campus, to be sure. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jayashri Kolpathy-Kramer.
Thank you again for the opportunity to be here and share some of the work we're doing in research. The earlier talks were just phenomenal, and at a, I was gonna maybe, can you hear me? Okay, yeah. So yeah, the talks earlier today were just absolutely amazing. We're going to come down a little bit lower in terms of level and talk about very practical things that we are doing in the department in the sort of general field of AI and how we hope that some of these things will actually eventually translate to patient care. As we heard, AI assistants are everywhere. Some of these images were actually generated with AI, and just for Chris's sake, absolutely nothing that was confidential or highly confidential goes to ChatGPT. We are using only some of these images that were used with other sort of outside of the Copilot system. In our division, we do research in AI, we do work in patient care, we do work in education and operations. So we're really thinking about how can we apply AI sort of across the spectrum in the division. AI in ophthalmology is a really amazing use case. Ophthalmology is an extremely data intensive domain. There's a lot of different modalities. There's images, there's notes, there's measurements, there's medications. And so what we hope again with AI is to be able to integrate all of these different data sources and help the clinicians make their life easier, improve patient care, improve treatment opportunities, and so on. There is a rising burden of eye disease worldwide. You can see this gap that between what we have in terms of resources, in terms of ophthalmology, eye care specialists, and what we need. And that gap is continuing to grow. And one way that we might be able to sort of mitigate that gap is by building technology into that and helping really a direct care to where we need it. This is especially a problem both in more rural settings as well as in places outside the US, where really, for instance, I do a lot of work in a disease called retinopathy of prematurity. It's a leading cause of preventable childhood blindness. And here in the US, there's a lot more pediatric ophthalmologists. In places like India, there's very, very few. And if we can use AI to sort of identify the patients who most need it and sort of manage care appropriately, I think we'll be in a much better place than we are right now. AI affords us opportunities in telemedicine and again, sort of making the care available outside of the centers that we have here. This is a map of ophthalmology in the US, and you can see right around where we are, it's pretty decent, but the whole area from just geographically around us, we see quite a gap in care. And we see that in many parts of the country, sort of north to south, there are parts of the country where we really don't have access to a lot of care in ophthalmology. So our goal within our department is to see how we can improve that by developing technology here and sort of disseminating it more broadly. So we have projects in telemedicine and ROP. We have a telemedicine service that was launched here. And again, we hope by combining AI with these advances in technology, we can move the technology we develop here into the field. We heard a lot about this notion of convergence. I think from an AI perspective in medicine, we really see a lot of this convergence happening right now. We need to have the computers, we need to have the data, we need the technologies, and we need the expert clinicians. And all of those factors are really at a convergence point here. And by bringing together data scientists that work very closely with the expert clinicians here, and the data that we can access in a very secure way, and the technology and the compute, we really hope to build something, a lot of really cool things, and deploy them broadly. Efficiency, there are many diseases, eye diseases that are undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. Half the people with diabetes don't get their annual checkup. About half the people with glaucoma don't know that they have glaucoma. AMD is a rising problem, especially as the population ages. And again, what we hope to do is to somehow make the job of a clinician who has to integrate these many different data sources across time, across modalities, easier by bringing together those data and making it easier with AI. So for instance, here's an example of a patient's eye changing over time. Typically what happens is the clinicians look at it side by side or at slightly different computers, for instance, and by overlaying those images, you can more easily appreciate the changes that happen as the disease progresses. So on the left is a patient with glaucoma, on the right is a patient with AMD, and these technologies allow the clinicians to really more easily appreciate change. So as mentioned, this is our division. On the left are all of our expert clinicians. They really tell us what are the important problems we should be working on. On the right are our data scientists, and we work very closely to take the advances that we see happening in the computer science and AI field and bring them to bear on problems in ophthalmology. So in addition to the experts in the fields, both on the clinical and the technical side, as well as the problems that are being raised by the clinicians, we need data and we need a compute ecosystem. So well before I got here, there's been a lot of effort to curate these wonderful data sets. There were registries in AMD, in ROP, in cataracts, and so on. These registries have been well curated with lots of data. And as a data scientist coming in, this is an amazing sort of gold mine of it's a gold mine in a sense because we can now apply our AI techniques to these data sets that are beautifully curated. So on the right is an ecosystem that we built with help from Dalen and others within the SLICE environment. So this is a highly secure local compute environment. We get data, retrospective data through Health Data Compass. We get imaging data from the PACS machines, from the imaging devices. We use AI to curate the data sets. Clinical data, as anybody who's worked with it knows, is very, very messy. So how do we sort of create these wonderfully curated data sets in a secure environment that is completely walled off from the internet? So all of this is completely walled off from the internet. It's very secure. Again, our colleagues in IT helped us build this. We had help from IRB, from regulatory. So pretty much everybody, leadership on campus really helped support this building of this environment. And now we can create well-curated data sets for glaucoma, for AMD, for cataracts that are only accessible by appropriate authorization. We have the compute right there, so we can build AI, again, across diseases. A lot of the I'd like to point out that all of the tools that we're building for ophthalmology are also applicable to other areas. So the same sort of things we apply to radiology, oncology, and so on, because in some ways, many of these technologies are very similar. We want to measure the size of lesions. We want to see if it grows over time. We want to see how any therapy we apply changes it. The concept of digital twins had been brought up earlier. That is a lot of what we're doing is building digital twins of a patient so that we have the ability to modulate and ask what-if scenarios. What would we do if we change the treatment for this patient? Can we predict how are they going to respond without this treatment? What are they going to do with the treatment, and so on? So sort of very standard tasks that we do in image analysis in many different domains. First thing is segmentation. So we want to delineate the areas of interest, whether that's vessels or tumors or the boundaries of objects. And AI is really, really good at that these days. Image registration, the idea is, can you look at data over time and see how things are changing? So we've built tools for segmentation. We built tools for registration. This is our pipeline. Many of these are sort of open source tools that we built within the lab that allow us to appreciate change over time, detection, disease classification, regression, and so on. Once we have all of these tools, we actually start to glean biological insights. One problem in the past is many of these tasks are extremely time-consuming. Finding the size of lesions is very time-consuming, so people tend to do it very infrequently. And now what we can do is just apply it to all of our data. So when we do that, we can see how things change over time much more feasibly than we could without it. So on the left are some patients with geographic atrophy. We can see how their disease progresses over time. We can create forecasts like these sort of cones of uncertainty like you see for hurricanes. You can sort of predict where the patient is going to be. As you get more data, the cone of uncertainty narrows, and we create, again, the concept of a digital twin that's constantly updated as the data come in. Language models we've heard a lot about. They're used for all kinds of things, from very sort of trivial learning subjects, preparing talks, ambient listening, as we've mentioned. So I'm not going to go into a lot of that. So this didn't play, but there's an audio clip that was cloned in my voice. I just have to give an 11-second clip of myself speaking, and I can have all my slides, in a sense, transcribed, and sounds like me giving the talk, which is kind of scary, actually, but it works really well.
Switching gears, we will next touch on a couple aspirational as well as practical projects.
Anyway, now we are going into this area called oculomics. The idea with oculomics is essentially you can take a picture of the back of somebody's eye and give a lot more information about that person. Just a fundus photograph with AI can tell you how old they are, whether they're male or female, whether they're a smoker, what their risk of heart disease is. And this is kind of both fascinating and a little scary. But there's a lot of excitement about this aspect, which is the notion of AI plus image analysis doing things well into the future that we didn't know that were possible. If you ask any clinician and ophthalmologist to take a picture of somebody's eye and say if they're male or female, there's absolutely no way they can do that. People have looked at chest x-rays and say what the self-reported race is. It is phenomenally good at that. And we really have no idea why it does that. We heard Matt talk about transparency. These things are not transparent at all. How do we know what they're doing? How do we interrogate them? When we think about deploying them, how do we do that in a safe manner? Because we don't have a clinician who can look at it and say if it's correct, because it's doing things that humans cannot do right now. So what are the implications of deploying AI in a setting that humans are not able to put the guardrails or validate it? On the sort of the exciting side of it, though, is this project that was funded through the Anschutz Accelerator Initiative. Greatly appreciate the support from the campus. Again, we are hoping to deploy these cameras in settings outside of ophthalmology, so in cardiology, endocrinology, and get these images that we see on the right with the fundus photos, OCTs, and predict all kinds of things about a person and their sort of current and future health. So we've seen a lot of this sort of AI with superhuman capabilities. The sex from the fundus photographs was mentioned. On the bottom right, we saw work that was done looking at mammograms and predicting the risk of breast cancer a long time away from now. Again, not something a human can do well. This was actually used during the time of COVID to figure out who gets triage from a perspective, because they had to really restrict the number of patients they could see. So we see all these things that sound very exciting with superhuman capabilities. It's getting really easy. We have kids, high school kids, who can write algorithms because they put in their question to ChatGPT. It writes out the code. You give it the data, you give it the output. It writes a code, it writes a paper. But without the clinical context, without the ethical framework, how do we think about sort of going from a place where it's so easy to a place where we can deploy it easily? So going back to, again, Matt's point, we have the risk of, it's seemingly superhuman. There's potentially some risk of bias. Things like shortcut learning happen. It's not transparent. So we really need to be vigilant when we think about deploying it. But I really, would like to stop by saying, I think it's a really exciting time. So many things have converged together to make a lot of this happen. We have an ecosystem that allows us to do this at scale. We have the expert clinicians on campus. We have the data scientists. We have the compute resources. And hopefully, we can take all of that and do something really good and sort of deploy it, not just here, but outside also. So thank you.
Well, thanks very much for that presentation. We're going to do 2 research talks, and then we're going to do a combined question and answer period after that. So we have one more presentation today. I'll just move forward here. The research bell. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Yangjun Gao, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Biomedical Informatics, where she leads the Language, Reasoning, and Knowledge, or LARC lab. Her research explores natural language processing and large language models for clinical applications, emphasizing evaluation and the responsible integration of AI in healthcare. Dr. Gao works closely with health systems, EHR vendors, and tech companies to advance trustworthy AI in medical workflows. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gao.
Good morning. Good afternoon. So it's great to be here to talk about the research that we are doing in our lab. So as Dr. Flaig has introduced, I'm actually coming from a computer science side. And the field I worked on, natural language processing, I worked on it during my PhD. I'm still working on it right now. It just suddenly become a hype in the nowadays. So that's why I name it like Beyond the Hype. But today I really hope to convey some message to all of you and then to say that there's actually a lot of really exciting research opportunities that's open for everyone, especially us in this campus. So I'm going to start my talk by echoing back with what all the speakers have talked about, which is the future is here. The trend that health systems, EHR vendors, and technology companies are partnering up to deploy and test AI in the real-world clinical workflow is unstoppable. And then one of the things that happened in my field is this transformer architecture that's being developed. So transformer become the deep learning architecture that's behind all of these more than large language models, LLMs backend. And as you can see in the right-hand side, there has been so many LLMs being deployed or like tested, and including like ChatGPT, or the most recent one is DeepSeek. So I heard a lot of like discussions, and also I saw from like news media's podcasts that talking about all these like fancy things that AI can do or LLMs can do specifically. And also heard a lot of questions from my physician colleagues and asking me, will AI replace doctors one day? Can they handle clinical text really perfectly? Can they help us to diagnose these patients? Because there are many users or customers that already go on ChatGPT and ask, oh, I'm feeling not well today. I'm feeling cold. What could be the diagnosis for myself? And what should I take for medications? And now today, I want to answer all of this to say, these are not real. The reality is AI can augment clinicians, not to replace them. And AI struggle with long and complex patient histories and medical records, as some of the previous speakers have mentioned about. And an LLM can assist in decision support in clinical workflow, but they must navigate under uncertainty, which I'm going to talk about today. Finally, LLMs can help, but they have to be validated in terms of safety and also reliable decision-making in order to be deployed in the real-world workflow. So today, my talk is going to talk about 4 use cases. I'm going to dive into a little bit details behind each of these use cases. So please bear with me. There might be some of the technical details, but I have to answer some of the questions you might have. I want to start with one of the AI use cases in healthcare that's probably the most famous and probably the most like larger scale right now, which is Epic's GPT-4. So Epic is partnering with Microsoft and OpenAI, and then to incorporate GPT-4 as their backend inside the EHR system. And that was since like 2023. One of the first use cases they look at is patient message reply. So think about how much of the patient message that one physician might get and how many times, how many hours they have to spend in replying all of those. So the goal of this The goal of this application is to help to answer this patient message automatically. One of the key behind this use case is the prompt engineering. As some of you who are interacting with these large language models might know, a good prompt is the key to get a reliable answer from this LLM. A good prompt is the key to ask them to do what you want to do. So the process of designing inputs or instructions from these AI models for specific outputs is called the prompt engineering. But designing a good prompt is really hard because it's a trial and error process. You have to try multiple times, multiple phrasing, depending on what is the LLMs that you're using. You might try different format, and you never know what is a good point, what is a good output that you will get. Second, a good prompt for human does not always translate to a good prompt for LLMs. That's because LLMs does not comprehend human language as we humans do. They have their own intrinsic properties and metrics to evaluate this language. Finally, think about in a healthcare system, we have physicians coming from different medical specialties. You have ED docs, you have ICU docs. Everyone coming from a different specialty also have their own preference. They like to start greeting in the beginning of the message. They also don't like to say, oh, please come in for appointment. Maybe they're too busy to see the patient. So they don't want to encourage that. So there is no one-size-fits-all solution to this problem. That's why we propose and develop something called Cleaning Prompt. It's actually a software and a framework that systematically optimizes prompts for non-technical users, especially those that's in the healthcare settings. So Clean Prompt includes a step-by-step guide to help non-technical users craft prompts. It also has built-in metrics to automatically optimize the prompts that you write to make it fit to the LLMs that you're choosing. We also built in something called retrieval augmented generation system. So it's kind of like having a database storing all the examples. And then the examples, it's coming from the users themselves. So if you have some good examples that might show, wow, this is the way that I reply to this patient's message, then these are the examples that you can put into the rack. So what happened is that in the front end, the user can say, these are the tasks I'm trying to achieve. So the clean prompt is helping them to automatically optimize the prompts so that the prompts can be reliably transferred to instructions for LLMs. Let's just quickly dive into what is the impact of Clean Prompt. So Clean Prompt is currently being live and deployed on a health system in our country. And then starting from February 2024, which is the first time that ChatGPT has been deployed in the health system that's without Clean Prompt, the clinician nurse usage rate is around 10%. And it's around 5% among the physicians, meaning that there's only 5% of the generated response was adopted finally as the message sent out. But we deployed Clean Prompt around like March or April of last year. And then in May, we already see a huge boost up because of using Clean Prompt. That brings up a lot of like really good message crafted by ChatGPT-4. We also see a huge improvement back to November last year. So now, last month when I checked in with my colleague in that health system, they were happy to tell me that the usage rate for nurse is around 90%, while the usage rate for physicians is around 75%. So that's a huge impact. I also want to say that Clean Prompt has received some nationwide recognition. So we got invitation to present at EMEA. We also got invitation to present at the EPIC user group meeting. Something that I'm really excited to share. So we're currently working on the Clean Prompt version for UC Health, and please bear with us, it's going to come soon. Now let me go into something that's more complex, the diagnostic decision support. And one of the things that I want to talk about is how LLMs can navigate under medical uncertainty. Because as Sir William Osler said, medicine is a science of uncertainty and an art of probability. Humans are navigating uncertainty in their daily life, as well as physicians. When they make the decisions about diagnosis, they have to think about what is the probability threshold of that patient being diagnosed with a disease, and what is the test threshold. That is what we know as post-test probability and pre-test probability. So what we are looking at in this project is how LLMs can predict this pre-test diagnosis probability. We start with looking at how LLMs coming up this probability. So LLMs are trained by this called next word prediction. The idea is when you give it an input during training, you ask it to predict what is the next word after that input. And then inside the LLMs, there will be probability distribution across all the possible words that it can think of. So that's where like the numbers are coming in. Among all these like thousands or millions of texts, like it learned the pattern of what is the next word, seeing the input. But is that next word probability the same as pretest probability? That's the question that we're asking. So to answer that question, I know there's a lot of technical details, but please bear with me. The left-hand side, the Venn diagram you're looking at is all the possible ways that you can retrieve uncertainty estimation from LLMs. These include logics. Logics just mean the probability distribution in their last layer of each word. And then the internal states just mean their internal hidden representation or their weights, what they look like. Do they contain any useful information? Sometimes we call them embeddings. There's also semantics, meaning that you're just directly asking these LLMs, how likely would the patient being diagnosed with sepsis? Or how likely do you think the patient will have arrhythmia? And then the right-hand side is where we correlate these LLM predictive probabilities with a state-of-the-art FDA-approved machine learning algorithm for this diagnosis prediction. So we're looking at sepsis, arrhythmia, congestive heart failure, and then we're also looking at two different types of LLMs. One is called Mistral, and then the other is called Llama. And then both are open source LLMs. And then we also look at how demographic variable might affect this LLM's prediction, because as Matt has said, many of these bias might be inherited inside these LLMs, therefore might impact the decision. We actually see that. So if you look at the blue bar is where we use the embeddings, which is the internal weights of the LLMs to train a classifier, and then to correlate that with the classifier. You see most positive correlation. However, in terms of the internal logics or the semantics, they're actually negatives, oftentimes negative correlation. That just means that this diagnosis prediction or estimation under uncertainty is not accurate at all. Now I want to jump into two other ongoing efforts in terms of how we're going to improve these AI algorithms, in particular LLMs. One is about the potential of LLM to summarize this long and complex longitudinal patient EHR data. And there are many reasons that we want to investigate this problem. You can think about all these potentials. LLM summarization could lead to saving clinicians time and also can help to come up with patient or caregiver communication. However, when we actually evaluate these LLMs on the longitudinal EHR data, what we found surprisingly is that these LLMs are not good at this task at all, even though they got over hundreds of thousands of token length while they're training, meaning they are designed to handle long context input, but still they suffer at this task. The second project that's currently going on is evaluating LLMs in terms of their safety on clinical tasks, especially clinical text generation. So many of the previous speakers have talked about how we can align LLMs to our human value. And then one of the things that make LLMs successful today is this called reinforcement learning from human feedback. So it's the way to align these LLMs with human preference. And that's why ChatGPT has become so successful. So we actually look at all of these relevant algorithms. You can see there are many. That's all about human alignment algorithms. And we are trying to find, can any of these algorithms that bring LLMs to a point that align with human value? We don't have an answer yet, but please bear with us. So finally, I just want to conclude my talk to say that not just hype in the field of LLMs, there are just so many other things that we can do. But in order to do that, I think we have to collaborate. We are at the front end of ensuring AI being safely deployed in clinical workflow. My lab is a really, really new lab. All of the students and staffs in my labs are computer scientists, but we're able to speak both language in terms of computer science and clinical workflow, or in clinical journals. It's because we have a large group of collaborators who's physicians, physician scientists, computer scientists, and students. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any question.
Hi, thank you so much for that talk. It's very exciting to hear what you're doing. I am wondering if you could share a little bit about the human experience with the nurses and practitioners who are using CliniPrompt. Did it take any training from your end in order to be able to do that? And I don't know, I'm just interested in that social aspect of not losing the person for the AI.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think there is a difference between how users are using them versus how they got deployed in clinical workflow. So first, I want to point out that the users of that CleanProm is everyone. So they are like nurses or clinicians who have no background in computer science or AI at all. We actually designed the interface to be step by step to start with, okay, what is the task you're trying to get the LM doing, and then what is your requirement? So this doesn't involve any training of like technical knowledge at all. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Hello, this is a question to Dr. Kalavati Kramer, and it's a very exciting topic of oculomics. I'm an ophthalmologist, and I'm very keen to understand how the data from oculomics can be used for patient care. Is it forensics? Is it anything further than that at this stage?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's a new field, and I think the hope is that if you can assess sort of overall health and your risk of various of conditions such as heart disease or neurological conditions that you might be undiagnosed or might have a higher propensity for the future, hopefully that'll help manage the patient better. So assessing your risk of current and future diseases is what the promise of oculomics is.
Thank you.
You're in the middle there. I have to get to you around here.
Thank you both for the great talks. Question for Dr. Gao. I guess, why do you think it is that the LLMs couldn't handle or didn't perform well when trying to summarize those long patient summaries? As a clinician in the pediatric ICU, we have patients that are in the hospital for months. Everything under the sun has happened to them, and trying to suss out and summarize that takes like a huge amount of time. So I'm curious why you think they failed and kind of what the next steps are to try to improve that summarization process.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So actually, I don't have a strong belief whether LLM should be able to summarize that longitudinal patient EHR data, but there has been many evidence showing that how LLMs has excelled in many clinical tasks, including clinical summarization, such as discharge summarization, or like just surpassing human performance in medical board licensing exams. I'm sure like most of you, if you pay attention to like JAMA or like the other clinical journals, they're bold headings of those papers coming out. So what we did is trying to see where is the boundary of LLMs in terms of like understanding EHR data and in terms of applying that clinical knowledge they have to like synthesizing this evidence, which we found that they're not good at. So I hope that answers your question.
Other questions?
Maybe a little bit for each of you, but I'm just curious, if you had wouldn't it be great if, wouldn't it be great if we could do X? Like, what is X?
You have the mic. So yeah, from our are you talking about from a system perspective, if from a what perspective?
From a research perspective, like at this moment we can't do this, but wouldn't it be great if we could do this?
So there's lots of very cool tools coming on board every day, and there's definitely the balance between the need for making sure we have a controlled environment versus the sort of cutting edge. And so I'm not sure how best to answer it, but for instance, if you look at tools like ChatGPT, Deep Research, or what are the research tools in various things, I think from a researcher perspective, those tools help synthesize the field and actually are really good for brainstorming and actually really good for suggesting ideas and sort of interacting with. So from a researcher's perspective, a path to getting access to those tools, not for PHI, but it's borderline between public and confidential data, I think. It's more public in the sense that you're asking broad research questions. So how do we get the campus sort of enabled to best use the tools that we have right now today, I think for researchers would be great. Similarly, I think there's a lot of tasks that researchers do that are extremely mundane. And I think scaling up the capability of these tools on the campus to accelerate that. So I've seen biologists like cell counting, like lots and lots of tasks that are very manual, very trivial for an AI to solve, but no path to go from what's feasible to what we do today. Scanning PDFs, just like efficiency tasks. So research brainstorming, efficiency tasks, and then from our perspective, a path to evaluate tools that we built more easily in the clinic in a safe environment are all things I wish we had today.
Yeah, I just want to add really quick on that. Sorry, I was thinking. I think one thing that we as a campus definitely can do is coming up in terms of the guidelines and kind of like a advice on what would expect LLMs would do. And then that actually goes back to a little bit about how we align LLMs with the human values. And I think that means a lot in a medical campus like us, because this is a high stakes domain. And I don't think that's something that only like computer science can do. I think it requires the whole community efforts from every stakeholders.
Looks like we have time for one more question.
I'll just ask one question at the end for maybe for Jayashree. When I first heard you talking about this, I'd sort of been introduced to radiomics and looked at different things, but maybe just say a little more about, for me, for oculomics, it is a special view and it gives you special information and it's just beyond the eye. So can you talk a little about what's special about the images that you're pursuing in that area with oculomics?
So it's not dissimilar. I mean, it's somewhat related to the concept of radiomics in the sense that the images actually have a lot more information than we perceive. In this particular case, because the eye really is, you can see the vascular system is a part of the brain. So we think that it really has a good window into your brain and your heart. So you can see tortuosity in the vessels. You can see hypertension. You can see a lot of things in your eyes that I think you can see plaque, you can see lots of things. So I think the idea is these signals exist. How can we use large amounts of well-curated data to do that? And I think we talked about it a little bit previously. A lot of the oculomic studies have done just looking at images with something. But what we really want to do is have the entire patient's record, because I think there's opportunity for shortcuts. As was mentioned before, an oculomics, multiple of them actually said, okay, we have a great model for Parkinson's, but it turns out it was just a model for age. So we have to be very careful that we're not tripping up on these shortcuts. But the idea is essentially you're looking at the vessels and the brain. So yep, hopefully someday we'll figure it out.
Let's give a round of applause. Thank you very much. So now for our last session of the day, we're going to focus on education. We have a panel discussion. Leading that, moderating, Lisa Bustos. Let me just say a few things introducing her. So Lisa Bustos is the director of the Office of Digital Learning at the Anschutz Medical Campus, bringing over a decade of dedicated service to the campus. With a strong background in instructional design, she spent 9 years developing and leading the Instructional Design Service Center at the School of Pharmacy, where she played a pivotal role. Feel free to come on out. Yeah. where she played a pivotal role in enhancing digital learning initiatives. Her expertise in curriculum development, instructional technologies, and faculty support have been instrumental in advancing innovative and effective learning experiences across campus. So please join me in welcoming Leisha.
All right. Thanks so much, Dr. Flaig, for that introduction. I am thrilled to introduce the amazing panel that has agreed to participate in our final discussion of the afternoon. I want to start with Dr. Benjamin Crockett is an assistant professor and division chair for maxillofacial imaging and AI innovations at the School of Dental Medicine. He directs the oral and maxillofacial radiology program, furthering excellence in radiological education and practice. His research focuses on evaluating the diagnostic accuracy of artificial intelligence in dental imaging, contributing to the advancement of AI applications in patient care. And we have Dr. Heather Anderson, who is an assistant professor and the director of assessment and outcomes at the University of Colorado Skaggs School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. She has joint appointments in the Colorado School of Public Health and the Division of Bioinformatics and Personalized Medicine. She designs and engages in outcomes research with a focus on decreasing adverse events and increasing effective and appropriate use of medications, particularly for depression. She also does research on technology use and assessment in pharmacy education. And then joining her from the School of Pharmacy is Dr. Sunny Linenberg, who is a professor in the School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. And in addition to teaching at the School of Pharmacy, Dr. Linenberg teaches students in the schools of medicine and dental medicine. Her research and clinical areas of interest include medication, safety, dementia, cardiovascular disease, health promotion, and neurologic disorders. We also have Dr. Ryan Peterson joining us as an assistant professor of biostatistics and informatics at CU, who has taught applied biostats 2, statistical consulting, and a PhD elective on model selection. He's a collaborative biostatistician working with the pulmonary division, and his research interests are on transparency in machine learning, best practices in interdisciplinary research, and statistical computing. And last but not least, we have Dr. Antonio Porras, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Biostatistics and Informatics, where he teaches courses on machine learning and biomedical image analysis. He also directs the Medical Image Phenotyping Lab and serves as Director of Research in the Department of Pediatric Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery at Children's Hospital, Colorado. His research interest is the development of computational and machine learning methods and tools to improve the understanding, diagnosis, and treatment of pathology. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And this question is for pretty much most of the panelists, but can you tell me what initially led you to explore AI for teaching and learning? And were there any specific challenges or opportunities that inspired you? We can go ahead and start with Sunny there on the end.
So, mine was pretty simple. My daughter is at a university outside of Colorado, and she was telling me as soon as ChatGPT was released that there were many students at her university who were using ChatGPT. And so another colleague and I wanted to know how much our students were using ChatGPT. Were they using it for clinical purposes? Maybe in the pharmacy, were they using it to help them study, to make quizzes or practice exam questions? Were they using it to help write papers? Were they using it to help summarize information? And so we decided to do a survey of our students.
Yeah, very similar to Sunny, and I was one of the colleagues she worked with on that survey. We knew our students were using it, so we figured we better get ahead of it and figure out how they were using it, and also still grappling with, and it leads, kind of level or layers on the question that I asked earlier. When do we tell our students to use it? When do we tell them not to use it? How do we tell them to use it? Things like that. So there's still a lot to learn, and we haven't figured it all out.
Over in the dental school, we have a variety of ways that we use AI in education as well as our clinical experiences. Some of the ways that we've used it in education We've used it for simulating patient interactions. We've used it for assessment of students' exams or papers or things like that. For the clinical aspect, we have a variety of things such as helping us design different kinds of restorations that we use to take care of our patients' dental diseases. The area that I mainly focus on is the radiographic applications. And so there's different types of things that we need to diagnose on our radiographs, such as dental cavities or caries, bone loss, and inflammation. And the reason that I got so interested in these AI applications of radiographic diagnosis is because there's a lot of companies that are out there in the real world that have already started or have already begun and in the middle of marketing a lot of these AI tools to dentists. And they make a lot of claims like it's going to improve your diagnosis, it's going to increase your production, things of those nature. And a lot of these claims are just coming from the company, but we really don't understand exactly the effects of, the truth behind these things. So, where are they making these claims that it improves your diagnostic accuracy? And so a lot of the work that we're doing at the dental school is to evaluate kind of the truth to some of these things, the efficacy of them, and see just, how much of those statements they're actually making are accurate. Because the truth is that we do a lot of tests in radiology, or we do a lot of tests in dentistry. One of them is radiographic evaluation, and those tests in and of themselves aren't perfect. So therefore, the AI is also not going to be perfect. So there's going to be a lot of false positives and negatives. And we really want to explore the truth to those types of things. So.
All right, we're going to hop over to Ryan because I have a special question for Antonio here in a second. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've taught a couple courses, as you mentioned. The one that initially got me thinking about AI was actually my class, statistical consulting. So for this class, the students typically are have quantitative backgrounds and are not necessarily. I need to learn how to be a collaborative statistician, which involves a lot of communication. So in 2020 is when I started the class and I had to learn how to work in COVID, right? So I got all of best practices. I thought about all the best practices and I got all of my materials in asynchronous format. They could do discussions on Canvas and I was happy about that. And then AI came, right? And I realized that if I was a student, I might just use AI and I would have to do very little effort to actually succeed in the course at that point. So, but I did want to jump on board because for all of the reasons people have been saying, it's super important to teach students how to use these tools. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit more, I think, in some of the other questions about exactly what I did. That's what got me initially interested in incorporating AI. It was a challenge, really.
So Antonio, can you tell us why you decided you wanted to teach AI to students on a health sciences campus?
Yeah, so the reason why I get this special question is because I don't really use AI during teaching, but I do teach AI. I teach methods, and the reason why I do that and why I propose doing that when I came here is because during my career and my training, I'm an engineer by training, so I did the path from technical training to a PhD on methods, and then in my postdoctoral stage, I started trying to learn a lot more about the clinical problem, very specifically on developmental pathology, which is what my lab has a big focus on. And during that process, a lot of the problems that we were having, the solution was actually on the methods. It wasn't on having more data, it was on the methods. And when it came to Anschutz, when my chair on my second year asked me, if you could make a wish, what would you like to teach? It was like methods of machine learning. And that's pretty much why I chose to teach that here. I think Anschutz is an amazing campus with a lot of medical and translational expertise and in biology and basic sciences. But I think at the time, and this was like probably 4 or 5 years ago, we were missing a little bit of technical training on machine learning to train our students, our graduate students, especially now that almost everybody is using data science approaches for their analysis. And that was my choice, and that's the reason.
Awesome. So let's talk about what are we doing in the classroom? I feel like that's a big part of this discussion is what are we doing in the classroom? How are we incorporating AI into that teaching and learning environment? And if you all have some specific examples to share, we'd love to hear it.
Sure, I can go. At the School of Pharmacy, we have multiple different faculty that coordinate different courses that have incorporated AI into the curriculum. My course is a P1 course that I direct, and it's called Self-Care Over-the-Counter Medications. And in that course, we have first-year students. So they're just fresh into pharmacy school. And they're learning about over-the-counter medications versus non-pharmacologic treatments, and they're learning how to triage patients to a provider and who's safe to treat over-the-counter. So in this course, we teach a lot of drug information about over-the-counter medications, and they're also in a drug information course where they learn how to use health science library resources like micromedics, facts and comparisons, and they use even primary literature. So in this activity, we've had this activity 2 years in a row. The first year where we had the activity, we had the students look up drug information questions about cough and cold products. So for example, they were worded in a way like a patient would ask the pharmacist. One of the questions was, what is more effective for cough, honey, or Delsim? So then what we have the students do is we have them look in a drug information resource that they were taught. We have them look that question up in ChatGPT and look the question up in Microsoft Copilot. What the students are intending to learn from that is, are they accurate? Are there inaccuracies in the information? Is it consistent with what they found in their drug information resource? Are the references there? Are they real references? We also had them rephrase the question by changing the words. So for example, does honey work better than Delsim or dextromethorphan? And so does that reframing of the question make a difference? The second year we used herbal products, and when we wanted them to learn about herbal products, we have a specific resource that we teach the students called NatMed Pro, and that's really our gold standard for drug information for herbal products. In the second year, then the students had more case-based questions. If you remember back to ChatGPT originally, if you put in a case-based type question, it would say that this is a patient and I can't answer the question. And but that has changed as AI has changed very rapidly. You can insert patient type questions, but all of this information that they were typing in were just made up case examples, and they didn't have actual patient information. So when I go to this, you can see this is just an example of one of the case questions that was asking about a 62-year-old man who's taking atorvastatin. He has muscle pain. He wants to take coenzyme Q10. Is that okay? He's also on aspirin and ibuprofen, and it sounds like they've already interviewed him. What we had the students do then was compare those two different resources. So this particular student example, we had 20 different questions we gave them. This particular student then stated that the ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot response was pretty similar to what they found in NatMed Pro. They found, though, that when they looked at ChatGPT, it was a little bit more wordy, and that might be, something that a patient might not actually prefer. Specifically, ChatGPT, we wanted to utilize that because patients are going to potentially utilize ChatGPT. They might not have the availability of Microsoft Copilot. And then you can see that when they compared that to Copilot, there were a little bit of differences in the lengthiness of the response, but in general, both were okay. So then what the students said at the end there was that they actually preferred using ChatGPT. So the point of this was to really have them see, did it simulate the same information where the references were not the same as what they found in NatMed Pro for most of these examples. So it's interestingly come to the same conclusion, different references. And is it something that, they would be comfortable with patients utilizing?
Ryan, do you want to go ahead and share your example?
Yeah, sure. So, so in my case, as I mentioned, I had these assignments that students would traditionally complete asynchronously in a discussion. Those were based off of these things called that I call Sharp videos, which is essentially videos that Julia Sharp from CSU put together. And they're great because they kind of show a role play between a statistical practitioner and a domain expert, where they kind of have a meeting and they just go through some topics that are very common that you see. So it's kind of like rehearsing the future, as Bill said earlier, or we just call it like role play. It really gets them more comfortable with the role of a statistical practitioner. And so instead of doing those discussions asynchronously, what I did is I brought all of those into synchronous discussions, which are actually more fun anyway, once COVID let down, of course, and we could be in person. And then I actually decided to create like an AI Mad Libs. I hope people know what Mad Libs are, but essentially I did a bunch of prompt engineering type things that people have talked about. And I said, okay, AI, this is probably bad for Hollywood, but it's really, really good for me because I can have AI help my students write scripts for statistical practitioners. And they essentially fill out this Mad Libs that says, okay, a senior or junior researcher comes to you, a statistical practitioner, and has this question, and they fill in the blank essentially, and then the Mad Libs kind of goes on. This researcher, has a deadline coming up, and they can fill in all of these blanks about some research-based characteristics that occur in interdisciplinary team science, and then they tell ChatGPT or whatever LLM, you're a very gifted screenwriter, these kind of prompt engineering things. So have it write me an engaging script that I can act out with my other student that I'm working with on this assignment, and then also generate some discussion questions to lead in the class. And so it's a really kind of fun exercise for the students to interact with LLMs and also learn how to, what it's like to be a statistical practitioner.
Awesome. So, what are some obstacles that you have faced while implementing AI into the classroom?
Did you want to start? I don't know if this is an obstacle, actually integrating it into the teaching, maybe cursory, but the more we integrate it into teaching, I think the more students might think, okay, I can use this whenever I want. And when it comes to assessments, that's not necessarily the case, right? So our academic fellow has a poster about a project she's working on right now, where we realized some students were trying to use AI browser extensions during exams that are proctored with remote proctoring. So clearly not supposed to be using outside resources. But these extensions that can kind of, draw a square around a question and get the answer to it. And, we caught this on video recordings, and so she's comparing a few of those AI extension browsers to see how do they do on these exams. And they clearly, they do better on multiple choice questions and short answers. So it kind of is making us kind of think about how we write our assessments, right? So if the students are going to try to use these tools, can we write our assessments in a different way that makes it harder for them to cheat using these tools? So check out her poster, linking up there because she's sitting up there. So check out her poster. I think she said it's set up in the bridge, but I think again, students just think they can use these tools. And so we have to kind of cut them off at the pass and figure out how can we assess them in a way where it's going to make it harder to use those tools so we can really assess their learning and knowledge.
In dental education, we have a variety of skills that we need to train our students in order to complete. And some of those are more physical things like preparing teeth, removing disease. Other areas are things like making proper diagnosis of our patients. And this can be done in a variety of different ways, like visual presentation, looking in the oral cavity. It can be done by tactile feel. And another way is through radiographic evaluations. And the AI tools that are on the market out there are basically illustrating areas of disease or areas that don't have disease. So these things are going to be prominent with our students. And one of the challenges that we face are making sure that our students understand the pros and cons of these tools. As is talked about with every other kind of AI evaluation or tool that's out there, there's going to be certain things that it does really well and certain things that it doesn't do very well. And if we just introduce these things to our students and just kind of throw the tool at them and say, here you go, just use it as you see fit, we're really not going to understand exactly how it affects the thought process behind that student. We want to make sure that they're thinking critically, they're evaluating things appropriately, and not just taking AI's word for it. We want to actually make sure that they look at the evaluation and think to themselves, okay, is this something that I should trust, or is this something that I should maybe go back on and not go along with? So some of the research that we want to conduct is basically looking at the decision-making pattern of a student's diagnosis with the use of AI and the different ways that it can be presented to them. So does it make them better? Does it make them overdiagnose or underdiagnose? And these are all things that are really, really early on because we haven't had these tools for very long. And there's not a lot of research on these, and we don't know exactly what it does to that thought process. So we just want to be cautious as we're bringing it in, make sure we evaluate it fully and understand those things before we really start trying to give it to our students and teach them exactly the benefits and the risks involved in the use of these tools.
Sunny, I know that you had a really interesting experience with bias. Do you want to share that?
Sure, yeah. So one of the things that I worry about is if we're using these tools, will there be unappreciated bias that is then incorporated into our student learning? And exactly to your point too, to making decisions and stuff like that. And I was giving a presentation for the Cameroonian Pharmacists Association USA group, and I wanted a picture of a pharmacist with a cape, like a, superwoman or something like that. And I asked Microsoft Copilot to draw me a picture of a pharmacist with a cape. Well, 60% of the United States pharmacists are women, but out came a picture of a white man with a cape. And so I was like, oh, that's not exactly what I wanted. I really wanted the picture to resonate with the group that I was speaking to. And so then I asked Microsoft Copilot I said, please change the picture to a Black pharmacist with a cape. And it came out with a Black male pharmacist with a cape. And, again, 60% of the pharmacists are women. And so I had to redirect it again. And it did make me a gorgeous picture of a female Black pharmacist with a cape eventually. But I worry about that kind of scenario where there are biases that could be introduced into our student learning. Also, when we think about back to the accuracy of the information we're getting, I don't know always if it's appreciated that the resources that were utilized may or may not be valid. The resources that may be utilized could be hallucinations, and we have to actually check and make sure and verify that those resources are accurate, that the clinical trials that it cited were accurate. Both ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot will give you the references. You have to dig a little bit more and request the references from ChatGPT, but you have to verify that they're real. And I worry about that in our student learning as well.
Can you speak to what's the student reaction been? How do they feel about incorporating AI into their learning? Heather, do you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, sure. So we, Sunny alluded to or mentioned the survey that was done. And so this survey, granted, it was 1.5 years ago. And we did ask specifically about ChatGPT, but we surveyed all of our students in August of 2023, and we got 206 responses, almost 50%. And we asked them just how they were using this tool for academic purposes, personal, and clinical. And about 50% were using it for personal reasons. I imagine that's way higher now. And about 30% said they were using it for academic reasons. That also could have been underestimated because what came through loud and clear in the comments is we're not really sure how to use it. We're worried about using it. We don't know if it's accurate. But 62% were interested in learning how the tool can help them in their pharmacy studies. So I think there's that interest there of really wanting to know how to use it and also how to use it correctly and when not to use it. And I think that's important for us to keep in mind. And one thing that I did in the classroom, I teach in evidence-based medicine, and to tack on to what Sunny said about the references, that's one exercise we had our students do, come up with a quick research question, throw it into the tool of choice and look at the references it gives you. And not a single student in the room found a legitimate references. So the authors were correct. Those are existing people, and the journal names were correct, but there was no combination of that journal with that author and that, within that. So they'll figure it out eventually, right? Because ideally their next step is to go and find the study and read it, you'd hope. So they'll figure out then that it's not accurate, but that kind of teaching them, again, they want to know it too. It's not just us saying, you need to learn how to use this the right way. They really want to know as well. So.
Antonio, have you seen any changes in student motivation or collaboration, critical thinking since kind of this introduction of AI into the learning environment?
Well, in motivation for sure. AI is very popular, so everybody wants to take the course, right? Which is a great thing for me. But the thing that worries me more is definitely critical thinking. I don't know if someone has read this article in the last couple of weeks between Microsoft and Carnegie Mellon, showing how negatively the use of AI affect critical thinking. And this is something that we have seen for a long time. It's not something about AI, but also Google, Wikipedia. Like now students just go to a forum, copy paste a solution. It's a solution, not the right solution, but that's what they will give us an assignment many times. I think now with ChatGPT, we just ask ChatGPT to create the solution for you. In GitHub Copilot, you just put a comment in your code and it just like fills in everything. So the student really doesn't have to do anything. So something I've been doing is to design I have weekly assignments, so students every week need to solve a problem, and every problem is based on synthetic data that I generate, and there's always a trap. So if you go to whatever ChatGPT is going to give you, or whatever firm is going to give you, it's always going to be the wrong solution. So I think my first year I fought with students a little bit in terms of like, don't use this, don't use that. That's a lost war. So it's easier to just like, explain them why it's wrong, and then they do better. It takes about a month to two to actually start trusting me. Usually they trust the forum first, Wikipedia first, or YouTube first. But then after some training, they start trusting me and they start focusing on being a lot more critical. And that's one of the reasons why I minimize the use of AI in my class. Is the only methods class on AI that we have, and it's extremely important to be a critical thinker. We are working with biomedical data. The impact of biases is huge. The ethical implications of the methods that those students will end up developing will be huge as well. That's why we started the class with a super lecture by Matt DeCampo on ethics and biases on AI, and then we focus a lot every single assignment on that with those little traps, hopefully, to promote critical thinking.
Excellent. So looking ahead, how do you see AI evolving over the next few years, and what do you predict its role will be in healthcare education?
Is that for me?
It's for you, it's for Sunny, it's for Ben, whoever wants to tackle it.
Oh, sure. So I think in every single aspect of healthcare and healthcare education, I mean, we are seeing all this live closed captioning, right? So translation, like this is an issue that we have in the clinic all the time, right? Patient doesn't speak the language, like bring the translator. AI can help a lot with that. Nobody gets sick on Christmas, right? Like use the data to predict volumes, patient volumes. So you assign resources adequately. So you minimize costs. So, let alone, I mean, I don't have to talk about everything that has been said before about screening, diagnosis, improved treatment, personalized treatments. I personally work in pediatrics. So for me, screening, early intervention, that is starting to make a huge impact on the life quality of patients that have developmental pathology, and I'll pass it along.
Yeah, I think for healthcare education, and specifically with dentistry, we've only really seen the tip of the iceberg as far as what it can do and what it's going to be doing. It's very early on in its application for a lot of these different things. There's going to be more things that people come up with, things that they can train it to do. And it's going to be really important that you don't try to ignore it. It's not going away. It's not going anywhere. You really have to kind of delve into it and understand it to make sure that we're actually training our students how to use these tools properly, to make sure they understand exactly how they work, the underlying principles behind what they're doing, to make sure that they're educated and can make informed decisions about the future to be able to be good clinicians.
I'm just hoping that we still have jobs in the future, but one of the things that I think would be great is if we can harness AI to help our students improve their communication skills, communicating with patients of different cultures, communicating with patients of different age groups, communicating with really ill patients, healthy patients, just being able to experience angry patients, so that they are able to practice those skills more, because it's time consuming to do that. And it would be really helpful, I think, for our students to have as much practice as they can so that they're, ready for a lot of different experiences they might have in their end of their training and as a pharmacist.
And I think there's actually a really great poster later on avatars and AI, and kind of being able to, replicate that that's happening within dental medicine. All right, my last question, real quick. How can campus leadership better support faculty in preparing students for this new world of AI?
I mean, I'll go. Real quick, I just think it would be great if we could have a little bit more guidance on the education side. What I'm using is not confidential data. I'm not using student data, for example. We just have made up cases and, different simulated types of activities, but I think it would be helpful to just be clear for students on what is appropriate for us to use and what it's appropriate for them to use.
Yeah, I guess I would second that as well. I mean, I looked through the really nice website on AI tools, and it was nice to hear the talk earlier. But I think a lot of the university data is still unclear to me as to like what is instructional data, what are students allowed to use, what are we allowed to use? Is it if I post it publicly, then is that public data then I can? But that's a weird incentive for me to put everything public. If it's so all of that is a little bit still unclear to me personally as to like what my students should be allowed to use, and how, like, if I'm going to be teaching them, how I need to be able to play with those tools too in the way to understand, how the model is going to hallucinate, so I can evaluate that. Right.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from the rest of the panel?
I mean, if you can write a wish list, I will do that.
Yeah.
No, so I mean, I think on one hand, we need more efforts towards building more educational courses, computational or data-driven methodologies. I think, as I said before, everybody is gonna end up using those kind of methods, and it's very important that all our students actually understand what they're doing, what assumptions they're making, and how they work. I think that's one. And on the other hand, on top of what has been said, I would advocate for continuing to expand our data repositories in a centralized manner. I mean, the Colorado Biobank is an amazing initiative, but it's not perfect. And I work with imaging data. I've been here for 5 years. There is no centralized imaging data resource. Research packs that would be amazing for a lot of us on campus. And I'm going to stop there because.
Right. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. We're going to go ahead and open it up to questions from the audience that you might have regarding what we're doing with AI in the educational space.
Thanks, everyone. Monica Munoz, and I'm in biomedical informatics. I am wondering if one of you, maybe Antonio, can help us maybe with a little bit of tricks. I'm trying to see if anyone has taken the time to do a little bit of benchmarking on the use of maybe the LLMs across your students, your classes, and see if there have been some assessment of what has really worked for them and what kinds of things are definitely no-nos. I'm very selfishly looking for the tips on, what has worked and what hasn't.
You mean in the use of AI in class?
Yes, exactly.
I mean, I probably am the least indicated person to answer that just because I try to minimize its use, but maybe I can pass along to someone else.
One of the things that I think we have learned from students is that they really appreciate the ability to take a chapter, for example, a book chapter that they need to read and have AI provide some main points. Also, if you upload a chapter, it can provide sample exam questions or quiz questions for the students. And so I know they appreciate using it for that. I mean, it takes away some of their learning, right? If it's summarizing it for them and making the quiz questions for them. But I think that they still like doing it.
Yeah, one way that I've suggested some students use it in a research methods class or in evidence-based medicine, I guess, is encourage them to put their thoughts down on paper But as they're learning to do more technical writing, it's okay to ask for a little bit of help. Like, can you help me word this in a more technical way? Or can you help me make this more professional? But I also emphasize that if you do that with a chat bot, make sure you pay attention to what it spits out for you and don't just copy and paste it and pass it on. Make it a learning experience to actually learn. I do it too, right? So, help me make this email a little more professional or, something like that. But pay attention to how it rewords it for you, but also make sure it still sounds like your voice. And the students I've interacted with have liked that aspect of it.
All right. I had a question. So I think it was Dr. Anderson. You said something about, I think it was you, about how students were using the AI browsers to cheat during exams. And that really stuck with me. So this may end up being more of an education question than strictly an AI question. Because I'm wondering, like what is underlying that drive to cheat? And is that really the educational system because their outcome is, I need to get a good grade, versus I think going back to what Bill Quinn said earlier, the outcome maybe is, I need to learn how to learn. And so I'm wondering are there like systematic or system changes that we can make to help students become better learners? And maybe how does AI fit into that?
Yes, and I don't know. No, that's, and I think, and even Sunny may want to jump in on this as well. I think we were all, you kind of scratch your head for one, doing it in an environment where they know it's being recorded and we can see what they're doing and just very casually doing it anyway. Not every question, the student went back and double checked some questions with the AI extension. And this was, we use Canvas and this was before Canvas. Now Canvas now blocks this particular one. But yeah, I think it can start much, much earlier in the course, in the classroom, of teaching them really how to be learners, but also changing the way we assess the students, I think is going to be really important. However, even as I'm saying that, our board exam, our NAPLEX is all multiple choice, select all, right? There's no short answers on that. And so it's tricky to tell that line. How can we teach them to be critical thinkers and assess them in a way where we kind of force them to not be able to use tools at the same time as prepping them for this board exam, right? So I don't know.
I guess I'll add a little bit in terms of assessment, because in my class where we use it, it's less like, it's a little bit more discussion based, and there's not necessarily right answers in all of the questions. And that's actually really hard to assess with, if you're saying anyone can use ChatGPT, because like I said, if you're trying to grade on effort and like clarity of thought and that kind of thing in writing, AI is pretty good at that. You can get AI to give you an A- thing for that pretty easily. So I've been thinking, I haven't actually done this yet. This probably should be something I benchmark, right? But I thought about, AI does hallucinate a lot differently than we do. I mean, I don't hallucinate very much, I guess, but AI does all the time. And you mentioned references. So like, that's an easy one to catch as an evaluator. And I thought maybe I should just give a 0 if I see a reference in a discussion post that's wrong, because clearly that is actually a better indication of low effort than than bad grammar, for instance. That's kind of where I'm leaning currently.
If I can put my instructional design hat on real quick, I would challenge all of you as educators to really think about that learning process and really what is the end goal here. Bill talked earlier about how education kind of moves linear and AI is going this way. And so really taking a minute to think about how are we educating our students and why are we educating them, and what is it that we want them to be able to do as clinicians? And is it really to answer that multiple choice question, or do we really need to shake things up? And yeah, you're right. A lot of those board exams and things like that haven't quite caught up. But I definitely think that is something that we really should look at preparing our learners for.
One more quick question. Mine is a question and some comments. So I'm Jennifer Ricker, the Dean of the Graduate School, and I went to a AAMC GREAT meeting for graduate research and education and training. And they had a lot of great ideas about how we can incorporate AI into graduate courses, and especially to encourage critical thinking, even if they're using AI. And I'll just give one example. And my question / comment is whether we can set up, maybe Tom can assist with this, or somebody in leadership, if we could maybe set up some kind of electronic communication within the university, sharing ideas of how people are incorporating AI into their courses, because and other universities are doing this, and maybe we can share ideas with them through the AAMC. But one of them was in a journal club. They were having, AI can summarize a scientific article, but then they would actually have the students critique what the AI came up with and say, okay, is this really the right way to summarize this? And then what would you do next? And could AI predict what experiments to do next based on this? And you can have them do that in class. So then it's actually, they're using their critical thinking skills to basically judge whether AI did a good job or not. So there's a lot of cool examples like that I think it's kind of our obligation to start teaching students how to use this, because when they go out into the real world, they're going to have to use it in various different ways. So I think there's ways that we can still do it while getting them to think critically still and not just rely on AI.
If I could echo her suggestion, that's one thing I thought about what can, leadership do. Some kind of a group, whether it's a group that meets regularly or just exchanges ideas about how they're using it. Because I think so often, I know in the School of Pharmacy, we have people doing amazing things in the classroom, and they either assume everybody knows or nobody wants to know. And we're all like, no, we want to know. So I think sharing across campus would be incredible.
Thank you.
Round of applause. Let's give a great round of applause for our panel. I just have a couple of quick announcements before we move to the next phase. And I think to the last question, so thanks for that. There's a lot of interest in this. There are about 300 people or so that were online as we did this live. So there's 500 people or so that were engaged in this today. So there's certainly a lot of interest. Whether a community of practice grows out of that, I think, is a really interesting question. You could certainly imagine that. I'd like to do just some quick thank yous. We put this together pretty quickly. We had a great planning committee. If there's anybody here from the planning committee, I know there are a few. Can you just please just stand up for a second? We got a few here. Chris over here. To just wave a little. Let's give a round of applause to those people involved in the planning of this. Thanks a lot. We had great AV support. We had a number of volunteers that helped us today, and thanks to all of you for being here as well. Now, as we close this portion of the proceedings today, we are going to transition over to the posters. So I mentioned there were a lot of people that signed up for this event. There were a lot of posters, and very sadly and very unfortunately, we weren't able to find space for those posters. Only about half the posters are here, unfortunately. The posters can be located right out here in the lobby and then upstairs to the bridge. What I'd suggest is a lot of people are going to go here, so start in the bridge. There's some great refreshments outside. For those that are live streaming this, again, there's a good number on there. If you're on campus, feel free to come over for the poster session as well. Now, we did to sort of recognize the posters we had in 3 different areas. We recognized an outstanding poster. This was based on how it related to campus, how it represented AI, and how it was presented in poster form. So I'll announce the 3 outstanding posters in each of these areas. So in AI and administration, we recognize Rachel Wegmeister, who's the manager of the Office of Continuing and Professional Education, School of Medicine, and her colleagues in her, her poster, Enhancing Professionalism in Online Learning, AI-Generated Zoom Etiquette. Let's give them a round of applause. In the area of AI and health sciences education, we recognize Quinn Carlson and colleagues. Clint's the Director of Education Technologies and Innovation, the School of Medicine. Their project is Empathy in Action, AI Avatars, Transforming Social Emotional Patient Communication in Medical Education. Give them a round of applause as well. And finally, AI and research, we recognize Michael David and colleagues. He's a research instructor in the School of Medicine. Their poster was generalizability of deep learning segmentation of trabecular compartment in mouse vertebral bodies across micro CT image resolutions. Give them a round of applause. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for participating, and for all those that were a part of this, please move out to the lobby and enjoy the posters. Thank you.